Before the flood, before the pharaohs, before history dared to be written, there were monuments, sculpted in silence, buried in mystery, too enormous, too precise, and impossible to explain. They defy gravity, logic, and time itself. Who built them? And why do they whisper now? This is not archaeology. It is a code left by some forgotten world. Welcome to the most impossible structures in pre-flood history and the ancient secrets that refuse to die. If ancient mysteries make your blood boil and your brain itch, press the subscribe button. Each week, we dive in depth. And as we unearth lost worlds, leave a comment below. From where do you see us, and what time is it now? Let's see who follows us through space and time. Baalbek, Lebanon. In the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon, there's a paradox carved in stone. Baalbek, a name that sounds like the first syllables of an ancient god exhaling after a cosmic laugh. The site itself is a ruin of Rome. Yes, but also something older, deeper, stranger. You walk through the grounds of its temple and feel as if you have stumbled upon the remains of a war between gods and giants. And then you see them. They are not hidden. They are not buried. They are there, resting in the sun, as if waiting for someone to discover them. The trilithon, 3 stones. Only 3. But each is a 700-ton monster precisely cut and fitted into a foundation platform with such precision that not even a whisper of air passes. People try to describe their size by comparing them to airplanes, whales, or train cars, but the comparisons dwarf them. They're like nothing else. They are immovable objects that defy all explanation. And here comes the strange thing. These stones did not come from nowhere. They were extracted from a quarry. But the quarry is not close. It is on top of a hill. A stone called the Pregnant Woman's Stone, weighing more than 1,000 tons, is still there, as if it had been rejected for a marathon. Erect, intact, abandoned in the middle of movement. And this is where the mathematics go crazy. The ancient Romans are attributed with the construction of the Temple of Jupiter, the centerpiece of Baalbek. Its stone columns, arches, and reliefs are, of course, spectacular. But Roman architecture, despite its grandeur, tends to follow logic, engineering, physics, slaves, pulleys, ramps, elephants, whatever was necessary. However, here in Baalbek, the scale crosses the line between technological achievement and mythological madness. Because the Romans, those gods of marble and mortar, never moved such large stones anywhere else. Not in Rome, not in Carthage, not. In Alexandria, nowhere. So why here? Why 3 stones so huge that modern cranes can barely move them? And how? Let's analyze this last question. There are 3 fundamental problems with the trilithon that make it one of the most impossible megalithic feats on Earth. The weight, the precision, and the placement. First, the weight. A 700-ton stone is not a hypothesis. It is not a legend. It is real. It is measured. And it is exactly where someone or something put it thousands of years ago. To move a stone of that magnitude, even a few meters today, specialized hydraulic systems, advanced planning, and millions of dollars are needed. But in antiquity, with wooden rollers and slave labor, that was impossible. Only the tension would have broken the beams, shattered the ramps, and crushed bones. There's a reason why all the large modern engineering companies that have studied Baalbek respond with some version of yes, we don't know. Next, the precision. The stones of the trilithon are not only placed next to each other. They fit perfectly together like the most impossible puzzle in the world. You can't put a razor blade between them. There are no binding agents, no mortar, only friction, gravity, and perfection. This level of adjustment is not only aesthetic, but functional. The platform supports one of the most grandiose Roman temples ever built. That means the foundations could not settle, flex, or crack over time. They had to be perfect from day one, which leads us to the most puzzling part, the placement. These stones are not in a field in the middle of nowhere, as if they were a show from the Stone Age. They are 4 meters from the ground, forming the 6th row of a foundation wall. This means that whoever built this did not just move them. They lifted them and stacked them with what? Anti-gravity carts, choirs of angels, precision ropes made of unicorn hair. This is the moment when skeptics lean in and whisper, aliens. And of course, it's fun until you start looking for alternatives, because conventional explanations are not just weak, but insulting. The standard academic opinion is more or less like this. The Romans were brilliant engineers. They built aqueducts, roads, and amphitheaters. They had cranes powered by treadmills, teams of oxen, and plenty of time. With enough slaves and ingenuity, they could have dragged, lifted, and fixed the trilithon in place. Sure, and with enough monkeys, typewriters, and all of eternity, you get Shakespeare. But let's breathe. Let's assume, for the sake of sanity, that the Romans did not place the trilithon, that they found it, that the platform was already there, and that they built their temple on top. It wouldn't be the first time. Ancient cultures built on ancient ruins all the time. The Incas did it. The Egyptians did it. Even the people of Göbekli Tepe buried their own temple for reasons that are still unknown. So maybe, just maybe, the Romans were heirs, not creators. Because what if Baalbek is not a Roman temple? What if it is a prehistoric launch platform, a ritual complex, a refuge for refugees from before the last great flood? What if the builders of Baalbek were not men with chisels and sandals, but survivors of a lost civilization, a people whose names have been lost, but whose footprints are still imprinted on the stone? This leads us to the oldest trick in the archaeological manipulation manual, the chronological firewall. That invisible line that archaeologists draw and say that civilization began there. Before that, there were only hunter-gatherers with sticks. Göbekli Tepe shattered that firewall. But Baalbek laughs in its face because there is no official method to date the trilithon. Radiocarbon dating does not work on stone. So archaeologists date the site by its visible datable layers. Roman coins, Roman masonry, Roman inscriptions, and they say, "Do you see? It is Roman." But here's the problem. You cannot analyze the basement by carbon dating the wallpaper on the upper floor. You have to dig deeper. You have to look for inconsistencies, and Baalbek is full of them. Roman architecture, although exquisite, is clearly superimposed on something else. The styles do not match. The scale does not match. The ambition does not match. It's like finding a log cabin built atop a submerged aircraft carrier. You cannot pretend that the foundations belong to the cabin. You have to ask yourself who built the ship and why. Let's follow that clue. Let's look for the why. Why would someone ancient, prehistoric, alien, or otherwise move such huge stones? Some suggest it was for stability, that larger stones withstand earthquakes better. Others propose a ritual meaning, that the act of moving the unmovable was itself an offering. Others whisper about lost technologies, acoustic levitation, geopolymers, or resonance-based transport. Ideas that seem absurd until you look at the trilithon again and realize that the absurd already happened. The stones are there. That is the miracle or the curse of Baalbek. No matter how many times you look at it, study it, or simulate it, the facts remain the same. These three incredibly huge stones were extracted, moved, lifted, and placed with a precision that we cannot easily replicate today. Not with our technology, nor with our theories, nor without rewriting history. So here we are, in the shadow of a forgotten wonder. A place where myth and mortar collide. A place where the ancients dared to defy gravity itself. And if Baalbek is the basis of our mystery, then the next stop is not just a step, it is a fall. Because in the highlands of Bolivia, 3,870 meters above sea level, there are ruins that make Baalbek seem totally reasonable. Stones cut as if they were cakes. Blocks fitted together like 3D puzzles. Angles that mock geometry. Welcome to Pumapunku. Better sit down for this. Pumapunku, Bolivia. At almost 4,000 meters above sea level, the air becomes so thin that you can barely hear a whisper. It presses the lungs as if breathing through gauze. The Andean highlands are not a welcoming place for life. And yet, in the midst of the wind-swept desolation of the Bolivian highlands, someone or something left a message. Not in ink, nor in the form of myth, but in stone. This is Pumapunku, a place so far from expected that it does not seem ancient, but extraterrestrial. Not because of little green men, but because what is there simply should not exist. What do you see? What does it defy? The explanation is a collection of megalithic blocks scattered like Lego pieces forgotten since the beginning of time. They are not engraved with hieroglyphs or crowned by gods. They do not pretend to tell you what they are. Instead, they challenge you to explain how they were made. The stones are andesite and red sandstone, some of the hardest and brittle materials that can be molded. Forget about bronze chisels. You will be lucky if you scratch them with iron. And yet, there they are, cut and polished like factory components. They're blocks with perfectly flat faces, right angles so sharp that they could cut your pride, and details that seem less carvings and more like precision machining. They were not carved by hand using stone tools. They were designed. Do you know those H-shaped blocks that constantly appear in conspiracy documentaries? They are real. There are dozens of them, identical in size, shape, proportion, with recessed grooves, interlocking edges, and impeccable symmetry. You could exchange one for another, and it would fit perfectly. They are not similar. They are mass-produced duplicates made of stone. If you walk through Puma Punku with a set of calipers, as many have done, you will find tolerances of less than a millimeter. Holes drilled cleanly through solid blocks with a uniform diameter and depth. Side cuts so parallel that you can pass a metal square along the edge without hearing rubbing. There are cuts that penetrate several centimeters into the rock, maintaining the precision of the straight line throughout, as if they had been made with a modern saw. Which raises this question: how? Let us consider the conventional explanation. The Tiwanaku civilization between the years 500 and 1000 A.D.C. created this complex without a writing system, without known tools beyond bronze, without wheels in practical use, without pulleys, without cranes, only with human hands, stone tools, and amazing faith in strength and time. But let's be clear, bronze does not cut and bounces off andesite. Bronze begs for mercy. So the alternative explanation is as follows. They pecked for weeks, for months, with harder stones, over and over, slowly, deliberately creating geometries that look like the result of mass-rendered CD solid software. It's like saying someone carved the block of a Formula One engine using a spoon. Now let's talk about the size of stones. Some of the largest blocks in Puma Punku weigh over 100 tons. The sandstone slab used for the foundations weighed 130 tons. They were not extracted from any backyard. The andesite came from 90 kilometers away. The sandstone came from 10 kilometers across rough and uneven terrain, and they had to cross a river. It is a logistical nightmare, even with diesel engines. But up here, where the altitude begins to affect blood oxygen, dragging those stones across the field becomes more than implausible. It becomes madness. Let's go back in time. Let's imagine hundreds of workers. No pulleys, no beasts of burden, no wheels, just ropes, ramps, and willpower. Now imagine them navigating steep slopes, uneven terrain, and a cold, windswept plateau, dragging stones the size of small houses with wood that splinters with half the load. You begin to realize that this is not just a construction project. It's a death march. Even if they had infinite time, the end result would not be what one would expect from a primitive trial and error process. Industrial precision is not achieved by chance. Modular blocks with designed interfaces are not created accidentally. CAD symmetry is not achieved with a stone hammer and optimism. And then there is the disposition. Puma's distribution is not random. It's not just a pile of fancy blocks. The complex had platforms, doors, and steps assembled as a modular system. Many of the blocks were intertwined, not just stacked. That means whoever designed this did not only think vertically. He thought structurally and architecturally. Each block was part of a larger whole, and that whole was planned with a terrifying foresight. But today they are ruins, scattered and broken. The place seems to have been hit by some cosmic hammer. The stones lie knocked down, fragmented, some overturned, others thrown meters from their original positions. This does not seem like a collapse due to passage of time or erosion. It looks like violent destruction, a precision structure shattered by an explosion, earthquake, or something worse. One theory is a cataclysm, something sudden and overwhelming that ended the culture that built Puma Punku. A global flood, comet, a change of poles. It sounds dramatic until you realize the damage matches the story. It was not a slow decline. It was total destruction. The Tawanaka people may have inherited the site, expanded it, worshipped it, but did they build the complex? There's a silent debate buried under academic whispers about an origin prior to the Tiwanaku that perhaps, just perhaps, they found Pumapunku, as the Romans may have found Baalbek, as others may have found ruins in Turkey, India, and Egypt. Because here is the dirty secret. Pumapunku has not been conclusively dated. You can carbon date the nearby organic material, the coal, the wood, the bones, but not the stone. So when archaeologists say that Pumapunku is 1,500 years old, what they mean is that what was found near Pumapunku is 1,500 years old. But the stones could be much older. Some geologists and alternative researchers suggest dates that place Pumapunku at the end of the last ice age, about 12,000 years ago, a period that coincides disturbingly with myths of great floods, destroyed civilizations, and sudden events that changed the world. The Atlantis of Platon, the Sumerian flood, the biblical flood, stories that resonate from one culture to another. Stories that begin to seem less like metaphors and more like memories. And if Pumapunku is a memory carved in stone, then it is not just an anomaly. It is proof. Proof that something existed before our version of history began. Something capable of feats of engineering that we still struggle to explain. So what happened to them? Maybe they were exterminated. Maybe they left. Maybe they became us. But we forgot who we were. Pumapunku does not answer those questions. It simply leaves them floating in the air at high altitude, resonating through the fractured stones. This site is not alone. All over the world, there are structures like this. Structures that laugh at chronology. Structures that spit in the face of narratives of progress. Structures that whisper, "You don't know what you think you know," but Pumapunku is unique in a chilling sense. It looks like a crime scene, as if a technological civilization had stopped in the middle of a sentence, as if the place had been frozen in the act of construction and deconstruction and then blown up. And when you think you've seen everything impossible, when you think the limits of ancient precision and scale have been reached, the Andean highlands hand you one more card. A wall that is not only large, nor only solid, but monstrous, convex, concave, and woven like a giant stone snake. It is located in Peru and is waiting. Sakowin, are you still with us after Pumapunku? Then you are officially among the curious few. Press the subscribe button if you haven't yet. This has only just begun. And while we decipher the impossible, leave a comment. From what part of the world are you watching? And what time is it now? Let's create a map of our global alignment. Sakowin, Peru. It is a fortress. It is a wall. It is a stone serpent. On a hillside above the Peruvian city of Cusco, the ancient capital of the Inca Empire, is one of the most impressive megalithic structures on Earth. Locals say it's the head of a great serpent. From the sky, it certainly looks like it. Zigzagging tiers of huge stones, some weighing up to 200 tons, form the battlements of Sakowin. No matter how many documentaries I've seen or books I've read, being in front of it makes your head hurt because it shouldn't exist. We're not talking about a wall made with carved stone blocks. We're talking about a structure formed by nonlinear, irregular megaliths, with multiple angles intertwined. Each stone has a unique shape and fits with its neighbors with such precision that the whole set seems to have been molded like clay. But these are not bricks, but rocks. Some as tall as 3 men, others heavier than diesel locomotives. All of them fused without mortar, without concrete, without a single visible joint. How? Let's set aside for a moment the impossibility of its construction. Let's talk only about logistics. To move a 100-ton stone, you need strength. Not theoretical force, but brute force. Of the type that not only breaks tools, but destroys civilizations if used incorrectly. The stones of Sakowin were extracted kilometers away. They were dragged, floated, rolled, or something like that through valleys, climbing slopes, and finally fitted in a place on a hillside that was never thought to hold them. And they're not just there. They fit. They lock. Like a prehistoric version of Lego. designed by a mind that had long abandoned the idea of easy geometry. Many of the stones have up to a dozen faces, each precisely cut to fit the faces of the surrounding blocks. There are no repetitive patterns, no squares on squares for convenience. Each union is unique. This is not construction. This is sculpture on the scale of tectonic plates. Conventional archaeology tells us that the Incas built Sacsayhuaman in the 15th century. But there is a problem. The Incas themselves never claimed to have built it all. They said it was already there, a gift from the gods, a relic of the past. They built on top. They repaired some sections. They used it. But the oldest parts, largest stones, tightest joints, most incredible feats of masonry, even those they attributed to the first ones, a forgotten people with a forgotten name. The precision of the joints defies reason. Not even a piece of paper can fit between them. Not because they are pressed together like bricks, but because they were carved to fit together at odd angles. That means the builders didn't just shape each stone alone. They molded them in relation to the stones already placed. Imagine trying to carve a piece of a puzzle to fit with 5 other pieces of the same puzzle. Each one weighs more than a space shuttle. And once you put it in place, it's done. No second chances, no adjustments, no mistakes. You have only one chance, one carving, one placement. Perfect or nothing. Let's be clear. There are no historical records of tools that could have achieved it. No chisels, no forges, no plans. There is no practical guide to making 200-ton stones meet their neighbors with millimeter precision. And no modern construction company, not even with laser scanners and heavy cranes, has attempted to replicate Sacsayhuaman. Why? Because it's not just difficult, it's insane. Now look closer. Many of the stones are convex and concave simultaneously. They curve outward on one face and inward on another. Some do not join in flat joints, but in curved undulating lines. It's not just decorative. It is structural, earthquake-resistant, and flexible under pressure. The kind of design that is obtained after centuries of seismic engineering and, more disturbingly, the inherited knowledge of a civilization that had already seen everything collapse. And it collapsed. The upper levels of Sacsayhuaman, with finer and smaller stones, are Inca. No one disputes it. But the deeper you go, the bigger and stranger the stones become. The more advanced, the more inexplicable. It is a reversal of expected history. The further back you go, the better the craftsmanship. That's not how civilization is supposed to work. We are told that history is a constant progression from ignorance to enlightenment, from stone to steel, from caves to cathedrals. But Sacsayhuaman opens a gap in that story. Because what we see here is not primitive. It's something later. A ruin of genius, not its beginning. Now let's talk about technique. There are 3 main theories about how this masonry was achieved. First, the orthodox view. Shape the stones with hammers and hours of laborious abrasion. Is possible, yes, but not on this scale. Not with this precision, and certainly not in a time frame that matches the known history of the Incas. Second, the lost technology theory, according to which the builders had access to tools, perhaps metallic, or even sound or heat, that allowed them to soften the stone or manipulate it as if it were clay. There is no conclusive evidence of this technology. Only the stones themselves, but the stones are proof enough. Third, and the strangest of all, the liquid stone hypothesis, according to which some of the blocks were molded in situ using a geopolymer compound. In essence, it's ancient concrete. This would explain seamless joints, complex faces, and a molded look. But the Sacan stones aren't synthetic. They are natural limestone and andesite. So, unless natural stones were melted and reshaped, this theory crashes against a wall, literally. And yet, despite all this, Sacsayhuaman endures. It has survived countless earthquakes, conquests, inclement weather, and wars. The Spanish conquistadors tried to tear it down. They managed to loot the smaller stones, but could not move the large ones or even budge them. So the greatest destructive force of the early modern era surrendered and built its churches with the remains that they could carry. The rest they left in place, as monuments of a previous and stranger world. Walk through the zigzagging walls of Sacsayhuaman, and you'll feel it. The feeling that something does not belong, is not in time, and does not fit into the usual molds of history. It is too refined to be primitive, too strong to be decorative, and too massive to be ritual. It was built to last not centuries, but eras, through floods, fires, and earthquakes. And what for? That is the question that stirs your insides. Why would someone move such huge stones, give them such a perfect shape, and fit them together so intricately, unless they had a purpose beyond the obvious? Protection against what? An invading army? Earthquakes, or something else? It is easy to fall into the trap. The snake-shaped arrangement, the three-stepped levels, the astronomical alignment. Everything suggests coded knowledge. Something bigger than a fortress. Perhaps even older than the Incas themselves were willing to admit. And here's the most surprising thing. This isn't the only site like this. Throughout Peru, throughout the Andes, throughout the world, the same footprint is found. Giant stones, strangely shaped, intertwined, absurd weights, impossible angles, without mortar, without margin for error. It is as if an ancient brotherhood of megalithic engineers had roamed the planet, building in the same way, with the same impossible standards, and then disappeared. What were they building it for? Nobody knows. But it was not just a refuge. It was something intended to endure, to be found, to be remembered. And perhaps that is why it still stands. Not only as a wall, but as a warning that under our carefully packaged timelines, under the certainty of textbooks, there is a deeper story. A story of floods and fires, of giants and gods, of tools and techniques forgotten by time. And if Sacsayhuaman is the head of the snake, then the body extends beyond up, down, and to the bones of the earth. Right at the foot of the mountain, entangled in the jungle and mystery, the snake heads toward a sacred city in the clouds. One that sits like a jewel on top of the mountain, where the gods once walked, where the walls curve with the mountain, where ancient customs were hidden in plain sight. Machu Picchu is next. Machu Picchu, Peru, high in the Urubamba River Valley, wrapped in clouds like a mirage frozen in the middle of a dream, lies one of the most emblematic ruins in the world. Machu Picchu, an essential destination on every traveler's wish list, a mandatory photo in all history books. But if we remove the tourism, the selfie sticks, and the pan flute soundtrack, what remains is something stranger, older, something that should not be there at all. They call it the lost city of the Incas. But even that name is a kind of lie, because Machu Picchu was never really lost and may not be purely Inca. The story goes like this. In the mid-15th century, Pachacuti, the Inca emperor with a divine ego and a penchant for ordered the construction of a royal estate, something glorious, something unattainable, a city literally in the clouds. So the Incas got to work. They carved terraces into the steep slopes and built temples aligned with the solstice, observatories, sanctuaries, and aqueducts. They dragged granite from quarries hundreds of meters away, fusing it without mortar. They did what the Incas always did, turn impossible feats into infrastructure. Except not everything, because the more you explore Machu Picchu, the older it seems. Not chronologically, but architecturally. The highest and most photogenic temples, the Temple of the Sun, the Room of the Three Windows, and the Intihuatana stone, bear the classic mark of the Incas: polished stone, mortarless joints, and precise alignments with celestial events. But if you look closer, you'll find something far older. Under the terraces, behind the walls, embedded in the rock, there are megalithic blocks, some so large and perfectly integrated into the mountainside that they don't even seem like separate stones. It seems Machu Picchu grew, not was built, as if the mountain itself rose and decided to become a city. And then there's the difference in the masonry. The upper layers are typical of the Incas: square stones, polygonal lacework, dry stone walls that lean slightly inward to resist earthquakes. Sophisticated, yes, but human, understandable, replicable. The lower layers defy replication. Massive cyclopean blocks carved into impossible shapes, each one unique. each intertwined with its neighbors in ways that seem more biological than architectural. There are no straight lines. There is no modular repetition, only fluid, organic stone, as if the mountain had been shaped by a sensitive tide. It is the same disturbing signature we've seen before. In Sacsayhuaman, in Ollantaytambo, in Tiwanaku, a style that does not scale with time, but with mystery. The older it seems, the more precise it becomes. Now, let's discuss the terrain. Machu Picchu is not only high up, it is inaccessible. It clings to the saddle between two peaks, surrounded on three sides by steep cliffs. It is a logistical nightmare. Building anything here requires immense effort. Building a city is architectural masochism. The terrain had to be flattened, drained, terraced, and stabilized, and somehow its designers achieved it with surgical precision. The entire city is built with its own integrated drainage system, channels carved into the rock, gutters disguised as steps, and a knowledge of rainwater runoff that rivals modern engineering. Think about it. A civilization without wheels, iron tools, or a written language. At least none that has survived, designed a hydrological system that is still working half a millennium later. But again, the deepest mystery is not what the Incas built. It is what they built upon. There are persistent rumors about tunnels under Machu Picchu, hidden chambers, megalithic foundations that disappear into the mountainside like veins of a forgotten ambition. Some of the oldest stones look melted, as if they had been subjected to extreme heat or had softened like clay. It is not a theory. It is a visual observation. You can go there and see where the rock seems to drip, as if something beyond chisels and physical effort was at work. Conventional scholars dismiss these anomalies as erosion. But erosion does not explain the intentional shape. It does not explain the perfect fit between stones that curve to join like lovers frozen in an embrace. It does not explain the almost alien difference in architectural style between the upper and lower levels. It does not explain why the further down you go, the more advanced the construction becomes. Unless, of course, it is a legacy. And what if Machu Picchu is not a sacred achievement of the Incas, but a pile of civilization killers stacked on each other, each claiming the bones of the previous one? And what if the Incas, like the Romans, were simply the last occupants of a place with a prehistoric past? Let's see the layout. Machu Picchu is more than just a city. It is a machine. Its structures are aligned with astronomical phenomena. The June solstice, the December solstice, the Intihuatana stone, often called the mooring post of the sun, casts no shadow during the equinox. It is no coincidence. It is celestial engineering, and it suggests not only knowledge of astronomy, but an intimate knowledge, one acquired after generations of observation, of mapping the skies, not only to elaborate calendars, but to survive. So, who were the original architects? There are several theories. Some say it was an earlier branch of the Incas, forgotten by later scribes of the empire. Others suggest that it is a completely lost civilization, the Andean equivalent of Atlantis, annihilated by a catastrophe, which only left stones to whisper its legacy. And then there are the more esoteric suggestions that the place was chosen not only for its defense or its beauty, but for its energetic properties. That Machu Picchu is located on a ley line that is part of a global network of ancient power centers. That the city in the clouds was not only a royal refuge, but a spiritual antenna and an interface between heaven and earth. Believe it or not, one thing is clear. Machu Picchu was not simply built, it was placed. It adapts to the mountain like a second skin. Each terrace, each wall, each step aligns with the landscape. There is no geometry imposed on nature. There is a fusion, a symbiosis. That is not conquest. It is communion. And perhaps that is the secret. Perhaps the reason why Machu Picchu endures, the reason why it seems so supernatural, is because it was not only an architectural project, but a philosophy, a world vision carved in granite, one that saw the mountains not as obstacles, but as allies, one that did not separate the sacred from the scientific. Of course, the Spanish never found Machu Picchu. They burned Cusco. They dismantled the temples. But this miracle on the top of the mountain remained intact, wrapped in fog, hidden by the jungle, as if it wanted to be forgotten. And maybe that's how it was. Because once you see it, you really see it, you can't stop seeing the contradictions. You can't pretend that the official story, the one that appears printed in tourist brochures and is taught in textbooks, explains everything. It is not like that. The oldest parts of Machu Picchu belong to a world that makes no sense. A world where stones bend, where cities breathe with the mountain, where builders knew more than they should. And just when you think it can't get stranger, the road takes another turn. From Machu Picchu, the path winds to a less famous, but even more enigmatic place. A place where stones not only fit but float. Where the mountains are steep, the walls are colossal, and the construction turns the laws of physics into a suggestion. Ollantaytambo calls. Ollantaytambo, Peru. Hidden deep in the sacred valley of the Incas, where the Andes inhale fog and exhale myths. There's a place that makes you wonder not only who built it, but why reality has not yet reached it. It is not as famous as Machu Picchu, nor does it appear in tourist brochures. But what it lacks in postcard glamour, it more than makes up for with its impossibility, which makes you slap your forehead. Ollantaytambo, in part fortress, in part temple, in part city, and each of its stones is a question mark wrapped in granite. At first glance, Ollantaytambo seems like another Inca marvel. Terraces on the slopes, aqueducts that flow, urbanism in harmony with nature. It meets all requirements. But the moment your eyes rest on the megalithic stones that crown the Temple of the Sun, those requirements seem implausible. Because what you are contemplating is not just advanced for its time. It is advanced for ours. These stones aren't just big. They are titanic. Some weigh up to 60 tons. Each one was hoisted up a steep slope from a quarry located several kilometers away. And we are not talking about flat terrain. We're talking about river crossings, hairpin turns, and slopes so steep that your knees hurt just looking at them. Let's stop here. Just moving these stones, cutting them from the quarry, transporting them through terrain that would be a challenge even for a mountain goat, and then dragging them up the mountain to their current position would be a project that would require cranes, trucks, and heavy machinery today. The Incas had none of that. No pulleys, no iron tools, no wheels, just manpower. And yet, there are those stones on top of a mountain, perfectly aligned. Now look closer. The stones of the Sunday Temple of Ollantaytambo were not only transported. They were sculpted. Some are fitted into place with joints so tight that not even a needle fits between them. Others are carved with curious protrusions that do not have an obvious structural function, but seem deliberate, intentional, as if they were part of a language that we no longer speak. You'll also notice something else. The stones are pink granite with a bright tone in sunlight. But the quarry where they come from is on the other side of the river, on the other side of a wide valley, on the other side of a mighty river without any bridge. The orthodox explanation is that the builders diverted the river somehow, or created log bridges capable of supporting 60-ton blocks. Or perhaps they transported the stones during the dry season when the river was low. Sure, and maybe they transported them with hot air balloons. The reality is that there is no proven method for how these stones were moved. None. All theories are hypotheses wrapped in hope, clinging to the idea that sweat and stone tools are enough to sculpt miracles. But it gets worse because the largest stones in the Temple of the Sun appear unfinished. Some are tilted, others misaligned, others rest awkwardly against the structure as if they had frozen in the middle of construction. As if a storm had arrived in the middle of the sentence and the builders had never returned. What happened? That is the million-ton question. Some suggest that the Spanish invasion interrupted the construction, but the quality of the masonry and the megalithic base do not match the historical period. The Incas undoubtedly modified and built around it. But the deepest parts of the temple, the oldest, are carved with another hand, with another mind. We see this pattern again and again. The more you dig, the more precise the work is. The more massive the blocks, the more advanced the cuts. It is as if history had been reversed, as if someone had rewound civilization. And in the beginning, everything was great. Let's talk design. The embankments of Ollantaytambo are a masterpiece of agricultural engineering. Each embankment has its own microclimate, allowing different crops to grow at slightly different altitudes. The stone canals meander through the city, carrying water from the mountain springs with such precision that modern hydrologists have praised their efficiency. That is the contribution of the Incas, and it is impressive. But even this brilliance rests on something older, something stranger. The megalithic foundations of Ollantaytambo seem to defy linear time. The walls are built with multi-angled stones fitted without mortar, so well fitted that seismic activity barely affects them. They are earthquake-proof in a region that is anything but stable. The surfaces are smooth, sometimes polished. The edges are sharp. It is not the kind of craftsmanship achieved by hitting stones for centuries. Once again, we see the curious mix of styles. The polygonal masonry of the Incas overlaps on something else, something older, stranger. You see more recent repairs made with smaller, clumsy stones compared to the seamless giants below. It's like watching a modern artist trying to restore a Renaissance masterpiece with crayons. And then there is the location. Ollantaytambo is nestled at the confluence of three valleys, surrounded by steep cliffs and shaded by mountain ridges that look like sentinels. One of those ridges has a huge natural rock wall that looks sculpted, a huge face overlooking the city. Locals call it Tanupa or Viracha, according to tradition. A face of the gods, a watchman. Coincidence? Pareidolia, perhaps. Or perhaps the builders of Ollantaytambo were not simply building a fortress. Perhaps they were designing an observatory, a spiritual center, or a portal. Because this place not only defends the valley, but dominates it. Its walls are not just stone. They are maps of the earth, of the stars, of a knowledge that merges astronomy with geology, architecture with myth. The solar alignments of Ollantaytambo are undeniable. During the solstice, sunlight passes through gaps in the mountains to hit specific points in the temple. Shadows climb the walls, forming patterns too regular to be accidental. The place comes alive with the celestial rhythm. And if that was intentional, if the design of this mountain fortress was not conceived only for war, but to observe the sky, then we are talking about a civilization that measured time with stones and memories. A civilization that may not have been the Inca, or at least not only them. We see signs of interruption, constructions that were started and never finished, damage that suggests a catastrophe, not conquest. Some researchers whisper about cataclysms, floods, earthquakes, or even comet impacts that shattered an earlier era and left its remains buried in the mountains. Myths about floods are not unique to Sumer or Egypt. The Andes also have them. The Incas told stories about the divine beings Viracha, who came before, who shaped the earth, and who disappeared after the flood. What if those are not just myths? What if they are memories? Because what Ollantaytambo presents is not just a puzzle. It is a fracture line, a place where history is divided between what we know and what we're not supposed to remember. When you walk through its terraces, you feel the change. The altitude leaves you breathless, but it's more than that. It is the weight of something older that oppresses you. You feel how the question grows within your bones. How much of history is based on assumptions? We are told that the Incas were the pinnacle of pre-Columbian civilization, and in many senses, they were. But what if they were also the heirs, the guardians of a much older legacy? A legacy carved in stone with such obstinacy that it defies the climate, war, and time itself. Ollantaytambo does not answer those questions. It simply stands there, stone upon stone, looking at the sky, watching. And if you think that here is where the impossible ends, if you think this is the deepest part of the rabbit hole, wait. Because beyond the Andes, beyond America, on the other side of the Sahara, there is a monument so enormous, geometrically precise, and arrogantly out of place that it dwarfs all who contemplate it. The pyramids of Giza are calling. The Egyptian pyramids, the Giza complex, in particular the Great Pyramid. The Giza Plateau rises like a defiant memory. 3 pyramids that rise against time, erosion, and all attempts to explain them. Among them, a supreme queen. The Great Pyramid of Giza, A monument so colossal and meticulously built that it should not only dominate the horizon of the desert of Egypt, but also our sense of historical possibility. We have been told the official story that around 2560 AC, the pharaoh Khufu commissioned the Great Pyramid as his tomb. That 20 years later, 23 million limestone blocks weighing up to 80 tons have been extracted, transported, hoisted, and fitted into place with mathematical precision. All this using only copper tools, wooden sleds, and manpower. The story sounds noble, romantic, full of dusty glory and impressive logistics. But let's not fool ourselves. The mathematics do not add up. Let's start with the numbers. To complete the pyramid in 20 years, the workers would have had to place a block every 25 minutes, day and night, without rest for 2 decades straight. That means extracting, moving, shaping, aligning, and placing blocks at a dizzying speed without cranes, power tools, or GPS. And yet, here is the key. The Great Pyramid is not just a pile of rocks. It is an architectural code engraved in stone. Let's delve deeper. Each side of the base measures 2,304 m long, and those sides are aligned with true north, south, east, and west, with a margin of error of less than 1/15 degree. That is not impressive for the ancient world. It is impressive even today. Aligning a 6 million-ton monument with the cardinal points with such accuracy would be a feat of topographic genius, even with lasers and satellites. Then there is the footprint. The pyramid is built on a bedrock platform so level that it deviates less than an inch across its 13-acre base. That level of precision suggests a method of measurement and construction more refined than any attributed to the ancient kingdom. Inside, it is even stranger. The Great Pyramid is not hollow, but it is not solid either. It contains chambers, some known. Others, recently discovered, are connected by narrow ducts aligned with astronomical bodies. The king's chamber is lined with huge granite slabs, each weighing between 30 and 60 tons, transported from Aswan, more than 500 miles away. These slabs were not simply placed. They were fitted so precisely that not even a sheet of paper fits between them, and the internal angles remain disconcertingly perfect. The Great Gallery rises to 26 degrees with overhanging walls that support a ceiling so high that it could house most buildings. The corridors and wells are aligned with stars like the belt of Orion and Sirius, leading some to speculate that the entire structure is less a tomb and more a mechanical clock, a calendar, a cosmic harmonizer. But if it is a tomb, it is a strange one, because there is no decoration, no hieroglyphs, no treasures, no mummies, no inscriptions proclaiming the glory of Khufu. Only raw stone that resonates. Unlike all other known royal tombs in Egypt, which are full of painted scenes, elaborate spells, and divine announcements for the afterlife, the Great Pyramid is silent, and determined. Even its dimensions hint at something deeper. The height of the pyramid, multiplied by a certain factor, results in the polar radius of the Earth. The base, when measured correctly, encodes the number pi, whether by chance or by design. The proportions between height and base reflect the geometry of a sphere circumscribed by a pyramid. That kind of mathematical elegance is not the result of chance. Let's consider the facing stones. Originally, the Great Pyramid was covered in brilliant white limestone polished to a mirror finish. These stones fit with such precision that not even a razor blade could slide between them. They reflected the sun with such intensity that the pyramid could be seen shining from kilometers away. Some ancient historians described it as a radiant jewel. Most of the facing stones were looted in the Middle Ages, torn off, and used to build mosques and buildings in Cairo. But some remain, and their invoice suggests something completely different. Not only craftsmanship, but a level of refinement typically reserved for precision industrial manufacturing. Now imagine placing those facing stones, which weigh more than 15 tons, on top of a 146-meter-high structure without cranes or scaffolding. In an era when the wheel was still relatively new, it is not impossible, but it is implausible. So who built it? If it wasn't Khufu and his copper chisels, then who was it? One theory points to a civilization much older than the dynastic Egyptian people, whose knowledge of astronomy, geometry, and stone engineering eclipsed everything we currently associate with the Fourth Egyptian dynasty. A culture whose architectural footprints not only appear in Giza, but throughout the world, whispering of a forgotten era. Does it sound far-fetched? Let's go back to the Sphinx for a moment. The guardian of the plateau. Geologists have been debating the erosion of its body for decades. The deep vertical fissures carved into its enclosure suggest water erosion. Torrential rains more in line with a more humid, pre-desert Sahara. If that analysis is correct, the Sphinx and, potentially, the structures that surround it would date back to an era long before 2500 BCE. And if the Sphinx is older, then the pyramid must be reconsidered. Because here is the crux of the matter. There is no concrete contemporary documentation on the construction of the pyramid. There are no scrolls or murals or quarry records that definitively say that this is how we built the Great Pyramid. What we have are later inscriptions, stories written centuries after the events. And in archaeology, that kind of time gap should raise suspicions, not reinforce confidence. Then there is the question of why. If the pyramid is not a tomb, nothing in it suggests that it is, then what is it? Some believe it was a power plant. That the pyramid harnessed the subtle energy fields of the earth, amplified them through the crystalline properties of granite and limestone, and radiated them through its internal conduits. Others think it was a repository of knowledge, a stone hard drive that encoded geometry, astronomy, and cosmology in its dimensions. It's easy to dismiss these ideas as marginal until you realize that mainstream explanations require the same blind faith in unproven logistics. Let's face it, building the Great Pyramid today would still be a titanic task. We would have to manufacture custom cranes, develop heavy load, lifting systems, and spend billions on materials and labor. And even so, we would probably deviate a few millimeters here and there. We would not be able to match the absolute consistency of the precision found in this supposed ancient relic. So what does this tell us? It tells us that the Great Pyramid is not just an anomaly. It is a boundary marker, a line in the sand between the history we are taught and the history that could have been. It stands defiantly in the face of timelines, materials, science, and our collective sense of superiority. It whispers the same thing as Baalbek. The same thing that Puma Punka shouted. The same thing that Sakan and Ollantaytambo suggested. You forgot something. And that something is not a footnote. It is a lost chapter, a deleted prologue of human civilization. The Great Pyramid is not just a monument. It is a monument to memory itself. A cosmic marker that says, start here. And just when you think the madness reaches its peak, when you think the scale and silence of Giza cannot be surpassed, you fall under the sand, into the darkness, into a labyrinth where 100 tons of sarcophagi rest in perfect tunnels polished to a mirror finish, sealed in stone chambers that defy all explanation. Under Saqqara is the Sapium, and you'll want to take a flashlight. Serapam of Saqqara in Egypt. In the depths of the sands of Saqqara, at the end of a sloping passageway silently carved into limestone, lies a place that should not exist. It's dark. It's cold. It smells of dust, stone, and forgotten answers. It is called Serapeum and is, without exaggeration, one of the most disturbing enigmas of the ancient world. Imagine it. An underground labyrinth that extends more than 300 meters through solid rock and is flanked by side chambers. Each houses a monolithic stone box. These are not sarcophagi in the usual sense. They are coffins for gods, beasts, and mysteries. There are 24 boxes, each carved from a single block of granite or basalt. Each weighs between 70 and 100 tons, and the lids weigh another 30. Let be clear, these are not decorative tombs or ceremonial accessories. They are works of engineering. The precision of the boxes is mind-boggling. Internal corners that meet at perfect right angles, interiors polished like mirrors, and tolerances so tight that a human hair can barely fit between the box and its lid. Some boxes are so perfectly square, so smooth, so incredibly accurate that engineers who have studied them report tolerances of less than 2,000 ths of an inch. That's not art. It is industrial precision. And yet, we are told that they were manufactured 3,300 years ago at the time of the New Kingdom, carved with diorite balls and copper chisels, hoisted into place with brute force, ramps, and prayers. Let's pause for a moment. You are underground in a corridor barely wide enough to maneuver a van, let alone a 100-ton block of stone. The ceiling is low. The angles are awkward. There are no ramps. And yet, these boxes were not only moved there. They were placed delicately, perfectly inside niches just large enough to contain them. There are no signs of forced entry, no impact damage, no broken edges, as if each box had been levitated into position and deposited gently. To accept that this was done with rudimentary tools is to accept that somewhere in a lost manual of ancient logistics there's a chapter entitled How to Perform Precision Mechatronics Underground Without Electricity or Space. Because the Serapeum is not only strange, it is almost impossibly so. Let's go back to what the boxes are said to contain. According to conventional Egyptology, the Serapeum was a burial place for the sacred Apis bulls, revered as earthly incarnations of the god Ptah, later associated with Osiris and Serapis. The idea is that each box housed the mummified remains of a bull that were ritually buried and sealed forever. But here is the crux of the matter. Most of the boxes were found empty. Some had bones, a few remnants of organic material, but no clear remains of a preserved bull. Nothing that one would expect if the place had been used for centuries to house deified cattle. Then there is the question of scale. If the goal was to honor a bull, why build a sarcophagus the size of a studio apartment? Why move heaven and earth to place a perfectly machined 100-ton granite box in an underground chamber only to fill it with an animal? It doesn't make sense. Unless we're asking the wrong questions. Maybe the boxes weren't just for bulls. Perhaps the bulls were symbolic, part of a ritual or cult practice that had forgotten the original purpose of these objects. Perhaps the Serapio is a legacy of a much older civilization whose technology we no longer recognize as such because we cannot replicate it. Let's talk about granite for a moment. The granite used for the boxes of the Serapio came from quarry located almost 600 m to the south. That means these 100-ton monoliths weren't simply carved. They were transferred through the Nile Valley, loaded, floated, transported, then taken to a system of underground tunnels and installed with millimetric precision. No pulley system from that time is known that could bear such a load. There is no workforce strong enough to move that mass in such a small space without destroying the chamber itself they were trying to fill. And if you think that's all, think again. Some of the boxes show signs of strange tools, linear striations, excavation marks, even rotary cuts, suggesting tools that moved in circular motion. Not hand chiseling or pecking, but something more like lathes or high-speed cutting tools. Conventional scholars explain this as polishing or abrasion techniques over time. But polishing does not produce clefts. Abrasion does not create spiral grooves. So what is it that does? And why does no one seem to want to find out? There's a cognitive dissonance when you walk through the Serapeum. The tunnel walls are rough, coarse, unadorned. The lighting is modern, artificial. You see dust, pipes, cables. But then you turn a corner, and there it is. A perfect box, alien in its perfection. So smooth that you can see your reflection in the stone. So geometrically impeccable that it could be used as a calibration object for industrial machines. And there it is, waiting. It looks like something out of science fiction, like a black box recorder from a previous civilization. A safe, a vault. Not to save money, but data, secrets. Some researchers speculate that the boxes were designed to resonate, that they could emit a hum at specific frequencies, perhaps even vibrate when struck. There are stories, mostly anecdotal, of strange acoustic effects inside the chambers. Standing waves, echoes that never die. The boxes could have been part of a sound-based technology, a system that used vibration or frequency to store or transmit information. Far-fetched, perhaps, but not as much as believing that a team of Bronze Age workers descended into a basement carved into the rock, carrying a 100-ton granite cube with nothing more than ropes, wooden sleds, and optimism. And remember, the Serapeum was not discovered until 1850 by the French archaeologist Auguste Mariette, who found it by chance while searching for ancient texts. When he cleared the sand and entered the tomb, he must have thought he had found the remains of gods. What he actually found was something worse, a room full of questions, because there is no inscription that says, "This is how we did it." There are no murals depicting ramps, levers, or workers sweating under the sun. Only granite, darkness, silence. Even stranger, some of the boxes appear to have been damaged by force, not by time or erosion, but by attempts to break into them, as if later cultures had tried to open what they did not understand and failed. That tells us something. That even centuries or millennia later, these boxes remained sealed, intact, impenetrable. Those who built them did not simply want to bury something. They wanted it never to be found, never to be disturbed. They wanted the boxes to survive cataclysms, floods, fires time. And they have the Serapeum, like the Great Pyramid, like Baalbek, like Puma Punku, which exist defying time, a middle finger carved in stone pointing directly at the arrogance of our modern certainty. We want history to be linear so that it makes sense. We want it to be the story of constant progress. But the Serapeum whispers the opposite. It suggests peaks before valleys, genius before dust, and it is not the only whisper. Further north, even older, buried under layers of sediments and forgotten myths, stands a temple not made of bricks, but of pillars, circles of stone that precede writing, agriculture, and cities. A place where hunter-gatherers carved their dreams in stone and arranged them according to a cosmic order. Göbekli Tepe is waiting and will change everything. If the stone boxes of the Serapeum have not yet made a dent in your sense of reality, there's more where those came from. Subscribe now to stay on top of legends and the lost. And while the dust settles, tell us where you are watching from and what time it is right now. Let's see who is excavating history with us 24 hours a day. Go to the turkey clip, before the wheel, writing, or metal, even before agriculture. Long before pyramids pierced the sky, before Sumer emerged from mud and myth, before Egypt had gods with names, there was a hill, just a dusty mound in southeastern Turkey. Nothing special. The locals called it Kalina Barigida, a name that would be given to a place more conducive to hosting goats than to gods. But then they dug, and the world changed. Göbekli is not only old, it is incredibly old. It dates to around 9600 BC. It is 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. It is more than 7,000 years older than the Great Pyramid. It was built when humans, according to our textbooks, still lived in scattered bands, ate roots, and hunted deer. There are no cities, temples, or complex societies. And yet, here it is. A temple, a monument, a question mark carved from limestone. Huge T-shaped pillars, some more than 6 meters high, arranged in concentric circles, dozens of them. Each pillar weighs up to 20 tons, carved, lifted, and intentionally placed upright. Some pillars are anthropomorphic, with broad shoulders and arms crossed over their chests. Others are blank, but many are engraved with animals. Foxes, snakes, scorpions, wild boars, birds, predators, and prey. The engravings aren't random. They are symbolic, stylized, organized, and are deep reliefs. This means that someone didn't just scratch images in stone. They sculpted them carefully with tools and vision. And that's the problem. Because according to everything we knew, this site should not exist. Not so old. Not with this complexity, not with this precision. At the time Göbekli was built, human beings were supposedly still nomadic hunter-gatherers. But the labor investment here, in carving, quarrying, lifting, and aligning, suggests hundreds, perhaps thousands, of organized workers, implying a social hierarchy, shared beliefs, leadership, and planning. In other words, civilization shouldn't have existed yet. Göbekli turns the script around. It suggests that complex religious structures were not a result of agriculture. They preceded it. That people first came together to worship and build monuments to the sky, and only later discovered how to farm to sustain their gatherings. In this version of history, it was not the plow that gave rise to civilization. It was the altar. But Gökçe is not just a wrinkle in time. It's a fracture. Let's talk construction. The pillars were extracted from a nearby limestone bed. Okay, but shaping them, lifting them, and placing them without metal tools, without draft animals, without Chinesis, is such an amazing feat that it forces even the most conventional archaeologists to qualify their certainties. Imagine carving a 20-ton pillar, moving it over uneven terrain, and placing it upright using only ropes and ingenuity. Now imagine doing it over and over for centuries to build different enclosures superimposed on each other. Some enclosures are 6 meters deep, which means the previous levels were filled in and intentionally buried. That's right, Gökçe was buried on purpose. Whoever built it covered it meticulously. Not by collapse, not by accident, but on purpose. Layer after layer of filling hid the structure from the world for 10,000 years. Why? That question floats in air like the breath of ghosts. Was it sacred, dangerous, destined for preservation in the future, or hidden from it? Nobody knows. And then there's the symbolism. The carvings of Göbekli Tepe aren't just pretty images. They form a language, not written, but symbolic. The patterns are repeated. Some animals dominate, such as the fox. Others, like snakes, appear near certain configurations. Some researchers think the engravings may represent constellations, events, or cycles. Others go further. They point to the so-called vulture stone, Pillar 43. It shows a headless human figure, scorpion, and birds carrying spheres. For some, it's a representation of death, the soul's journey. For others, it is a cosmic story, an account of the impact of a young dust, a comet, and a catastrophe. That's how it is. Some believe that Göbekli isn't a memorial to the gods, but to an event that ended the world, a flood that ended civilization. The one that was repeated in Sumer, in Egypt, in Genesis, the one that shattered a previous advanced culture and only left stones to remember it. And that's where things get weird, because Göbekli Tepe didn't appear from nowhere. It shows signs of mastery, planning, and tradition. It looks like a continuation, not the beginning. The carving skills, symbolic language, architectural design, they're not small steps. They are advances by artisans already confident in their craft. And that means the knowledge had to come from somewhere. From that point of view, Göbekli isn't the alpha. It is the omega, the last gasp of something older, something lost. But who were they? The builders remain unnamed. No corpses have been found at the site. There are no houses or settlements, only tools, bones, and those monolithic circles. We don't know what they were called, what gods they worshipped, or what stories they told. But we do know this: they remembered. They remembered something so powerful that they carved it in rock and buried it to protect it. A story not told with words, but with alignments, animals, and architecture. A message through the millennia. And maybe that's why they buried it. Maybe they knew something was coming. A flood, change, oblivion. Maybe they saw it and decided to preserve a fragment of the beginning. Even the layout of Göbekli seems intentional. Enclosures arranged in patterns, some circular, others with 2 central pillars facing each other like sentinels. Male and female, heaven and earth, life and death. It looks like a ritual theater, a place not only of worship, but of transmission, knowledge transmitted through symbols, shadow, and light. And this place, this frozen ritual, wasn't alone. Scattered throughout the region are other hills, other mounds, Kantip, Sefertip, more teepees still buried, waiting. The entire region may be a vast necropolis of memory, a prehistoric network like the Vatican, a shattered library. And if Göbekli is the spearhead, what's under the rest? The narrative that we have inherited says that civilization began in Sumer, flourished in Egypt, developed, and began to decay. Göbekli is older than all of them, older than cities, older than writing, and older than the idea of time. And yet there it stands. The stone does not lie. Not like paper or the kings. The pillars remain silent. But their silence isn't ignorance. It is knowledge, the kind of knowledge whispering, "You're not first." And just when you start to get used to this, just when you start to accept that civilization may have emerged long before anyone dared to admit it, you discover that it was not alone. Because it is 37 kilometers away, in the same desolate and dusty terrain, something even stranger rises. Karahan, a brother, a rival, a deeper chapter. And the hill whispers again. Kahane, Turkey. The earth keeps secrets. Some hide behind stones, others are stones. Just 37 kilometers southeast of Göbekli, the earth folds, forming another hill, mound, a name almost no one outside Turkey had heard until recently. Kahan Tepe. If Bekli was the whisper that awakened the world, Kahan is a punch that leaves it breathless. Because if one ancient site changes history and is shocking, two are a pattern, message, a map. Kahan Tepe not only echoes Goblet, but amplifies and, in a way, surpasses it. Because if Göbekli Tepe proved that we were wrong about the beginnings of civilization, Kahan Tepe suggests we have not even begun to understand how wrong we were. Let's begin with the basics. Karahan Tepe rose to fame in the early 2000s, but actual excavations did not begin until much later. And when they did, they removed the earth as if it was a scab, hiding something old and still raw. The site is older than old. It is part of the so-called constellation of pre-ceramic Neolithic sites, TSH Tempeller, spread throughout southeastern Turkey. They predate the wheel, plow, and even ceramics. That is so. The people who built Kahan Tepe had not even discovered how to make a cup, but they could extract, mold, and erect 10-ton limestone monoliths with anatomical precision and philosophical intention. Explain that what they unearthed here was not just another stone circle. It was different. The T-shaped pillars of Göbekli stand in the air, as they once did. They are part of a larger ceremonial field, but Kahan Tepe is hidden underground. It is secret underground, like something meant to be hidden or protected. The central feature is a chamber carved directly into the rock, accessed by a narrow entrance duct that looks more like a throat than a door. Inside, 11 huge phallic pillars in an upright position surround the walls, watching, waiting. In the chamber's center, a figure, a single stone head emerging from the rock, looks down with a solemn, supernatural expression. It is disturbing. You do not enter this chamber. You descend. The air changes. It cools, and one feels not like a visitor, but like an intruder. It is not a tourist place. It is a uterus, tomb, a theater of forgotten gods. And that's just one room. Around the site are more monoliths, symbols, and strange, suggestive carvings. Again, animals, snakes, wild cats, birds, but also humans, faces, bodies. The beginnings of iconography, the birth of narrative. Some stones are carved with rows of phalluses, which has led many to baptize Kahan as either the temple of the ancestors or the temple of fertility. But they're only conjectures, assumptions about something that we cannot decipher, because it is not just about prehistoric pornography. It is too organized, too specific. The repetition has rhythm, and rhythm is a first step towards meaning. Let's talk about that central figure, the one that is carved into the ground. It is not big nor grandiose, but it transmits power. The head is elongated, the features abstract, the almond-shaped eyes observant. There is no clear context. There are no other statues like this. There are no writings that explain it. Only this solemn and isolated presence, like a stone priest frozen in the middle of the night or an abandoned sentinel when the rest of the world forgot him. And the chamber in which it is located is not only symbolic. It is acoustically designed. The whispers bounce, the steps resonate. It is designed for sound, for rituals, for resonance. And when you realize that, another possibility begins to appear. Perhaps Kahan was not only sacred. Perhaps it was sonic. Think about it. Underground chambers, echo chambers, perfectly smooth walls, symbolic pillars, a figure placed precisely where echoes converge. This was not built only for the eyes. It was built for the ears, for vibration, for altered states. What if Kahan Tepe was a primitive cathedral, not in the religious sense, but in a neurological one. A place where sound shaped minds, where chants echoes induced trance, where rituals had nothing to do with belief, but experience. There is more. Kahan, as if it had been buried on purpose, filled in, erased. And, again, we are left with the question of why. Was it for shame, reverence, or preservation? Did the builders know that something was coming? Or were they the last generation that knew that history was coming to an end and decided to seal the book? Because, once again, the construction here is not work of amateurs. It shows sophistication, planning, and mastery of stone that rivals civilizations thousands of years younger. And all this without agriculture, without metallurgy, without any of the so-called essential elements of civilization. Which leads us to an uncomfortable possibility. Perhaps we have misinterpreted what civilization is. We have always linked civilization to material progress, to tools, to cities, to writing. But what if the first civilizations were not based on control, but connection? Not in agriculture, but in feelings. Not in engineering, but in energy. What if sites like Kantip were not anomalies, but models? Places where the first humans gathered to communicate with the gods, not necessarily, but also with each other, with nature, with the sky, with the past, and with the future. What if that type of intangible, experiential, symbolic civilization was not destroyed by ignorance, but a catastrophe? Because here is the key. Kahantip and its sister sites were not destroyed by conquest. There is no evidence of war, fires, or statues torn down. They were buried intact. That smacks of intentionality, of someone who decides, it's over. Seal it. Leave. Is the same sensation that one has in Sapum, Machu Picchu, and Pumapunku. It is the whisper that says something ended here. And when they're all piled together, a pattern will emerge. Around the end of the Younger Dryas, approximately 11,700 years ago, something enormous occurred. A change, a trauma. The glaciers melted. The sea level rose. Something big, fast, and deadly swept the planet. And yet, what has survived? The stone that remembers. Kahantip is not only an archaeological site. It is a scar that has never healed. And just when you think you can rest and assimilate the implications of ancient minds that created monuments of sound and shadow, another wave hits you. Because Karahan is not alone. It is part of a network, a constellation. And one of its stars is far from the desert. Under the waves of the Pacific, where a mountain of rock, stairs, and angles lies submerged under salt and secrets. The Yonaguni Monument awaits. And it may be the oldest of all. Yonaguni Monument, Japan, underwater. Off the southern coast of Japan, under the choppy waves of the East China Sea, lies a ruin that shouldn't exist. Divers discovered it by chance in 1980 on an ordinary day exploring the seabed near the island of Yonaguni, until the ocean drew back the curtain. And what it revealed was not coral, nor a shipwreck, nor the usual chaos of the sea, but geometry. Enormous right-angled terraces, flat platforms, steep walls, steps, corridors, an arrangement as if the sea had drowned a city but left the plan. This is the Yonaguni Monument. For some, it is irrefutable proof of a lost global civilization. For others, a curious geological peculiarity. But for anyone who has seen it with their own eyes, one thing is certain. It does not seem natural. The formation extends over 300 feet and rises about 90 feet from the ocean floor. From above, it looks like a ziggurat or stepped pyramidal platforms with well-defined edges that intersect at almost perfect right angles. There are flat surfaces so clean that they look machine-cut. The steps are so spaced that they defy randomness. Vertical drops cut the bedrock like architectural plans. And yet, conventional geology insists that everything is natural, just ocean currents, tectonic movements, erosion, pressure, and time. But let's delve into it, because if it is going to be claimed that nature did this, nature had better have a good architect on its team. Let's start with the steps. They are uniform, repetitive, and precisely cut into the rock. In some sections, they rise to constant heights and depths, like a staircase intended for giants. They are not one or two steps, but dozens, some of which extend for meters. That kind of symmetry is not usually found underwater, where erosion is a chaotic and directionless force. Nature does not care about the depth of the footprints. Then there are the corners. In Yonaguni, the corners do not erode. They persist. Right angles, 90 degrees joints that form walls, platforms, and corridors. On land, we would call them foundations. Underwater, we are told that they are coincidences, except that there are many, and they are connected. They form structures, not scattered rocks. Structures. A characteristic called the main terrace resembles a ceremonial platform with what looks like an altar. Nearby is a canal that meanders like a moat, and, beyond, a rectangular ditch with vertical stones. Some say they are pillars rising from its depths. And then there is the so-called turtle, a rocky outcrop shaped like a giant reptile, perched perfectly on one of the levels. Too much symbolism? Perhaps. But the coincidences start to add up when so many line up. Now, let's discuss the most disturbing possibility: the age. Yonaguni is submerged at a depth suggesting it sank near the end of the last glaciation, approximately between 10,000 and 12,000 years ago. It is the same period as Gobseep, the same interval as the most recent cataclysm, the same mysterious historical pause in which ice melted, oceans rose, and human memory was reset. If Yonaguni was above sea level before that, and there is geological evidence that it was, then we are facing a construction or at least a modification predating all known civilizations. It is not only older than the Great Pyramid, it is older than agriculture. Think about it. A megalithic structure at the bottom of the sea with architectural characteristics that reflect those of ancient temples around the world. Aligned steps, stone pillars, interlocking blocks, and it is thousands of years older than Sumer, than Egypt, than the wheel, and it is underwater. We don't just forget civilizations, we drown them. Skeptics argue that there are no tools, artifacts, or bones. That's true, but the ocean is not conducive to preservation. Salt water does not cradle history. It devours it. Wood dissolves. Metal corrodes. DNA disappears. The only thing left is stone. And that is the pattern. Because stone is stubborn. It doesn't care what we believe. It's simply there. Wait. It survives. Defenders of the natural formation theory point to similar geological formations elsewhere. Basalt columns, sandstone platforms, tectonic strata, but none of them show the arrangement at Yonaguni. The alignment, the order. It is not a cave system. It is not a reef. It is not a pile of rocks. It is a design. Even qualified architects and engineers who have examined the site admit that it seems deliberate. It looks like architecture. But perhaps the most disturbing characteristic of everything is not the structure itself. It is what surrounds it. Because Yonaguni is not isolated. The entire region surrounding the Ryukyu Islands is plagued by submerged anomalies, rock walls, terrace formations, and underwater ridges that look suspiciously artificial. It is as if the sea had consumed not a monument, but a city or a coast of cities, a network. And that leads us to cultural memory. Japan has myths of submerged kingdoms like MW or Lemuria. So do Polynesia, India, and even parts of South America. Stories of great floods, of lands that disappeared, of gods who walked among men and then withdrew to the depths. We have dismissed these stories as fantasies. But Yonaguni stands as an accusation amid the waves. It is not there to prove anything. It is simply there, silent, humid, uncomfortable. It does not care about academic pride or geological comfort. It only knows one thing. It exists. And it is not alone, because the stone remembers. And in the cold, black silence of the seabed, something waits. A whisper from before the flood. From before history hardened in textbooks. From before we decided what was possible. And when the currents calm, when the silt shifts and light filters through the blue, it is not only ruins that are seen. It is the outline of a civilization that did not forget. It was forgotten. And if the sea can hide a city, what else is hidden? Somewhere colder, wilder, far to the north, between the Siberian cliffs, where legends speak of giants and ancient walls built by hands too big to name. Gornaya Shia waits. And the stones there do not only defy belief, they mock it. Gornaya, Shia, megaliths, Siberia. Hidden in the wild, snow-covered nature of southern Siberia, where the mountains rise like sleeping gods and winter never leaves, lies a structure that breaks all the rules we thought we knew about stone, scale, and sanity. Gornaya Shorya, or the Wall of the Giants, as some have called it. You have probably never heard of it. There are no tourist buses, no documentaries narrated by educated British voices, no signs or fences, just an extensive wild area of granite and tigers where the cold bites and silence listens. A place where even Russian researchers tread carefully and where the stones seem to stare. At first glance, it looks like a landslide. Huge rocks piled on a steep slope. But then the pattern is appreciated. Geometry prevails. They are not loose stones. They are stacked, aligned, angled fitted blocks. Some stand vertically like towers. Others extend horizontally, forming tiers like the courses of an ancient wall. But these are not common megaliths. They go beyond the megalithic. These stones, whose weight is estimated at more than 3,000 tons, eclipse even the large blocks of Baalbek. And it is not a typo. 3,000 tons. For reference, that is approximately the weight of 500 elephants or 7 fully loaded Boeing 747s. In short, it is stupidly impossible. However, there they are, imposing slabs of stone cut with straight edges and right angles, intertwined as if they had been molded by the hand of some primeval architect with a taste for scale. The mere size of these blocks is mind-blowing. You don't try to imagine how they moved. You try to imagine why someone would try. There is no crane on Earth that could move one. There is no ancient ram system that could explain the logistics of placing them on the side of a mountain hundreds of meters above the valley floor. And the cuts are not natural fractures. They are too precise, too smooth. In some cases, the joints between the stones are so tight that they resemble the impossible joints of Sakowin or Pumapunku. It looks beveled, it looks aligned, it looks intentional. The orthodox explanation, geological formations, natural processes, freezing, thawing, and tectonic uplift. But that explanation quickly vanishes when facing the arrangement, the repetition, the improbable symmetry. This is not chaos, but choreography. And the thing gets worse because some blocks seem to have fallen. They have not fallen on their own, as if something had forcefully struck the wall, as if the upper levels had yielded under pressure. You can see stones shattered by the impact, split in half, and their clean internal faces exposed to the elements for the first time in millennia. You see what looks like a structural collapse, not erosion, a failure, implying the impossible, that this structure at some point was whole, complete, and functioning, that it was built, not born. And that means someone built this. Someone who could extract, mold, and place thousands of tons of stones into formation. Someone who did this in an era when Siberia was considered a prehistoric wasteland by nomadic tribes with stone tools and fireside myths. Without written records, without architectural tradition, without metal, without wheels, without science, only granite and freezing. So who did it? That question lingers like breath in cold air, bringing with it all the uncomfortable possibilities. Was there an earlier age of humanity, perhaps? A lost civilization that reached technological heights, not in the warmth of the Fertile Crescent, but in the icy and ruthless immensity of Siberia? What kind of culture builds at this scale? What for? A fortress, a city, a temple, or something strange, something that was not intended to house human beings, but to channel energy, store knowledge, or serve as a gateway. There's a chilling hypothesis that maintains that the megaliths of Goraya were not intended for us, but belonged to a race of beings, human or otherwise, who were not only taller, but also larger. The stones are enormous not only in weight, but also in proportion. You can walk under some horizontal slabs without bending. The scale seems incorrect, even in human, and that is where the myth begins to sprout through cracks. The locals talk about giants, not metaphorical ones. Giants, beings who lived before the floods, before the ice, before our species' amnesia settled. They speak of a time when the earth was ruled by men bigger than trees, stronger than storms. Creatures that could lift what we cannot even imagine moving. That carved the stone with a glance. That built mountains like we stack bricks. It sounds like fantasy until you look at the wall and realize that maybe it was not meant for us to find. Because Gornia is not easily accessible. There are no paved roads here. The nearest settlements are remote logging outposts. Most people do not know it exists at all. The first real photos did not appear until the 1990s, taken by Russian researcher Georgy Sididov and a few mountaineers. Since then, interest has been intermittent, fleeting, and mostly ignored. Why is that? Because it does not fit. It does not fit into the narrative. It does not fit the idea that humanity evolved in an orderly line from caves to cities, from sticks to smartphones. It is a rupture, a heresy, a fossilized accusation against the arrogance of our timeline. And what is worse, there is no explanation for why it is there. It is not near any known trade routes. It is not part of any known culture. It simply exists, like a marker left in the wrong chapter. So what does this mean? Perhaps it means that history is not a ladder, but a spiral. That civilizations rise and fall like tides. Though what we call progress is just a taste of memory. Or perhaps it means something else preceded us. Something that understood stone. Not only how to cut it, but how to speak to it. How to record, encode, how to remember. Because that is the common thread, isn't it? From Baalbek to Pumapunku, from Machu Picchu to Sarapam, from Gobisi to Yonon, the language endures, resists, remembers. And Gornia is a phrase in that language, a phrase carved into the grammar of the giants. And although we cannot translate it, we can feel it in our bones, in the cold, in the weight of unanswered questions. And just when you think you have seen the upper limit of the impossible, just when your brain asks for something normal, you encounter the Mediterranean. And on an island bathed by the sun, known for its beaches and quiet ruins, you find temples. But not of the type you expect. These are older, stranger, and not built but grown. Welcome to Malta, the megalithic temples of Malta, Hagar, Kim, Menagra, and many more. On the rocky coasts of Malta, bathed by the sun and eroded by waves, there are ruins so old they might be hallucinations. They are quiet, discreet, not huge like Giza, nor are they impregnated with myth like Bekleet, but they are older than both. They are older than Stonehenge. They are older than the pyramids. They are the megalithic temples of Malta. They are some of the most impossible structures ever built by human hands. Especially because, according to official chronology, those hands should not have existed in such a state of mastery. Hagar, Kim, Monstra, Tarsien, Al-Saflini, and others. Some date from 3600 BC. But many researchers maintain that they are much older, far older. Not only old in the linear sense, archaeological sense, but old in the mythological sense as before time was organized. Let's start with basics. The Maltese temples are not ruins in the usual sense. They are not ruined urban landscapes or collapsed towers. Their sculpted spaces are designed megalithic enclosures that seem more grown than built, as if they had been extracted from rock instead of placed on it. And they're not piles of rubble. These are sophisticated, independent stone structures, each with multiple apses like petals of a flower, that branch from a central axis. Think of stone labyrinths with carefully aligned corridors, interiors with chambers, and altars built into the walls. They are complex, symmetrical, and symbolic. Let's talk about size. Some of the stones used in Hagar, Kim, and Menagra weigh up to 20 tons. They're not small rocks. These are huge slabs of limestone, some more than 6 meters long, which are hoisted, molded, and fitted into place without cranes, pulleys, or any advanced tools. Now think about it. There are no forests in Malta. There never were. That means there were no wooden rollers or tall trees to make ramps. And yet, someone moved these stones. Someone placed them in place with a precision that would make modern stonemasons sweat. Then there's craftsmanship. These stones are not roughly carved. Many are perfectly curved, forming semicircular arches with an almost architectural arrogance. Some walls are decorated with spiral motifs carved directly into stone. Others feature representations of flora, fauna, and complex symbolic patterns that are random. They are repeated. It is not a decoration. It is a language, but one that we no longer understand. Let's talk about the alignment. Menagra, in particular, aligns to the solar calendar with disturbing precision. Its central door frames the sunrise during the spring and autumn equinoxes. At the solstices, light falls on the stone slabs in a precise, pre-planned way. It is not just rudimentary astronomy. It is simply not precise enough. It is a play of lights designed millennia before modern telescopes or ephemerides. This suggests not only an understanding of the solar cycles, but an intimate relationship with the movement of the skies. These builders were not merely farmers. They were truly cosmic architects. And yet, who exactly were they? This is where things become confusing, because the people who built these temples left little else. There is no written language, no recorded history, no clue as to what they were called or what they believed in. All we have are their bones, some clay figurines, and their temples. And their temples are quite strange. Some of the spaces are too small to be communal. There is not enough space for large gatherings, but they are too precise and arranged too ritually to be personal. There are narrow corridors that lead to isolated chambers, low doors, huge stones that seem placed not for their structural function, but for their symbolic meaning. In Hagar Kim, one of the stones has a perfectly circular hole, the size of a fist. At the solstices, light passes through that hole and falls on a specific altar. Precisely. Every year, without any fail. But why? Because these people were not building just shelters. They were building calendars, portals, instruments of some kind. Now, look at the ground all around them. There are deep, parallel grooves carved in a Malta's limestone bed. These grooves cross the landscape in odd directions, often leading directly toward the sea. Some intersect, others separate, and others double back. They are not marks for modern vehicles. They are indeed prehistoric. But how truly prehistoric? Some geologists claim that they are more than 10,000 years old, based on the erosion of the rock. Others claim they are far more recent. But here is the heart of it. Nobody actually knows what made them. The width between grooves is often too narrow for common carts. There are no remains of wheels, axles, or footprints to be found. Only the grooves that run through the landscape like veins, submerging under waves and disappearing into cliffs. If you believe in the most radical theories, these traces are the remains of an antediluvian technology, machines, vehicles, and even tools used by a civilization prior to the flood that has since become myth. If you believe in the mainstream, it is erosion, repeated pedestrian traffic, drag sleds, a mystery that we do not need to solve. But that is not enough because Malta, small as it is, far exceeds its archaeological weight now. This small island houses structures that have defied both time and logic now. The temples were buried under meters of earth and rubble when discovered. And yet they did not collapse. They were filled in deliberately. Do you even know what that means? Just like Göbekli Tepe. Same as Tepe. These temples were buried on purpose. Who does that? Who builds something monumental, sacred, astronomical, then hides it from the world? Only two types of people. Those who know that the end is near or those who have seen it already. And then there is silence. There are no records of these people emigrating. There is no evidence of war, nor any signs of disease. They did not disappear in the traditional archaeological sense. They simply stopped building. The culture that created the temples of Malta ended abruptly and cleanly, like a play with the last act torn out. Maybe they died. Maybe they left. Or maybe, just maybe, their civilization was not meant to last. Maybe the temples were not for the living. Maybe they were memories, warnings, instructions, and they left the message in the only language they knew would survive. The stone. And what a message. That civilization is not linear. That history is not a straight line. That the ancestors we imagine as barefoot farmers could have had maps of the stars, tools that we cannot name and knowledge that we are only beginning to rediscover. The temples of Malta are not anomalies. They are part of a pattern of remembering, breaking, and erasing. And when you follow that pattern throughout Europe, through ancient Gaul, you begin to find stones again. Not walls, nor temples, but lines, thousands of them, aligned, upright, and silent. Welcome to Karnak. The stones of Karnak, France. The wind blows from the Atlantic, rough and salty, brushing a quiet corner of Brittany in France. The land undulates with herring hills, fields of wildflowers, quiet villages that seem not to have changed since the Middle Ages. But it is enough to move a little away from the city to find something that does not belong in this place. Something that looks as if the gods had spilled their dominoes. Stones. Thousands of them, stretching over 4 kilometers, standing in rows, not scattered, not random, but aligned. This is Karnak, and it is not only one of the largest prehistoric sites worldwide. It is one of the most puzzling. We're talking about more than 3,000 megaliths over 6 meters high. Some do not reach waist height and stretch across the French countryside like the fossilized ribs of some forgotten machine. There are alignments, circles, dolmens, tumuli, menhirs, all the ancient vocabulary that you have seen in textbooks, but without context. Because Karnak is not a monument, it is a message, one that we have not yet deciphered. Let's talk about numbers. The stones were placed between approximately 4,500 and 3,300 BC. According to carbon dating of nearby materials, that makes them older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge. Not as old as Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe was buried for a reason. Karnak was left in the open as if it wanted to be seen, as if it needed seeing. And so it has been seen by archaeologists, mystics, military engineers, bricklayers, farmers, and, lately, drone pilots, who have begun to realize that the stones of Karnak are not only arranged in lines. They are arranged into patterns. Mathematical, geometric, celestial. Let's begin with the alignments. The stones are not just in rows. They are in perfect, parallel, equidistant rows, extending across the terrain with a stubborn refusal to be chaotic. In some areas, the stones gradually increase in size, starting with small markers at one end and rising like a crescendo towards huge slabs that rise to the sky. It's a rhythm, a progression, almost musical. Then there is orientation. Many rows are aligned on a northeast-southwest axis. Some align with the sunrise and sunset at the solstices. Others point to constellations, lunar cycles, the Pleiades. There is debate, of course, because everything ancient and astronomical is mired in debate. But the numbers match too often to be coincidence. And here is the most surprising thing. Some researchers believe that Karnak was a megalithic observatory, not only for one celestial body, but for many. A stone calculator, a calendar, a system for tracking solstices, equinoxes, eclipses, and planetary conjunctions. And if that's true, then those who built it were not primitive farmers. They were astronomers, engineers, geomancers. But wait, how? How is a 10-ton granite slab moved without wheels, without cranes, without steel? Some of the stones were quarried kilometers away, dragged across uneven terrain, placed upright without pulleys, balanced, aligned thousands of times over. What for? For the gods, for the rituals, for the stars. It makes no sense because building a single dolmen or circle of stones could be attributed to culture or religion, but building thousands of stones in organized grids requires something more. It requires infrastructure, and there is no trace of it. There are no cities, no temples, no permanent dwellings, just fields and stones. As if the builders had come, built, and disappeared like megalithic monks, leaving sacred geometry behind for the earth to remember. Let's discuss the types. Karnak is not just pink. It includes menhirs, vertical stones, some more than 6 meters high, planted like teeth in the earth. The horizontal stones of the dolmens are balanced on other vertical ones, as if they were stone tables, and are often used as tombs. Perhaps, but some show no human remains. Tumuli, burial mounds, long corridors, chambers covered with earth, sometimes built around dolmens, sometimes empty, stone circles, enclosures, meeting points, altars, stargates, choose the term you prefer. It is a buffet of sacred architecture without a coherent script. And the style is reminiscent of other sites, with similarities to Stonehenge, to the megalithic tombs of Ireland, to the menhirs of Portugal, and even to the dolmens of Korea. It is almost as if there was a common language, a blueprint, a megalithic tradition that spread across continents and centuries, one that whispered, "This is how memory is anchored to the earth." But it is not limited to style. Some theorists have proposed that the entire Karnak site resonates with geomagnetic currents, that the placement of the stones enhances the subtle energies of the earth, that the builders were tracing ley lines. That Karnak is not a monument at all. It's a machine, a giant grounded circuit board designed not to worship the stars, but to interact with them. The idea seems far-fetched until you take into account the precision of the alignments, until you take into account the acoustics of the dolmens, the resonant frequencies of the stone types, the constant relationship to the cardinal points. Perhaps it was a machine, one that we cannot turn on anymore. And we do not know who built it. Nobody knows. There are theories. Pre-Celtic tribes, sea peoples, even survivors of Atlantis. All hypotheses are too vague or too daring. What we know for sure is this. The builders left no writings, no mythology, no oral traditions, no names, only the standing stones, waiting. And this is where things change. Because Karnak feels different from other sites. Less vertical, less monumental, but more expansive, as if it were not intended to impress from a single point of view, but to unfold as you move through it. It is kinetic architecture, a story that is revealed only step by step. And perhaps that is the point, because Karnak is about rhythm, repetition, pattern. It teaches by walking, by counting, by being there. It is not a statue. It is a ritual in motion. And if you walk enough, you start to feel it. The tempo, the pulse, like a forgotten metronome marking a message in granite. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 again and again, until your feet and the earth begin to speak the same language. It is not myth, it is memory. And Karnak remembers something we have forgotten. Something big, precise, deliberate. And just when you think you have finally touched the mystery, it escapes because the rows end, the stones stop, the fields open, and the sky feels heavy again. But the pattern does not disappear. It moves to the other side of the canal, to an island, to a circle, to the most emblematic stone structure in the world, Stonehenge. Stonehenge, England. In the wind-swept plains of Salisbury, where sheep graze as if history were nothing more than grass, stands a monument, stoic, gray, surrounded by myths older than memory. Everyone knows it. It appears in all textbooks. All tourists take a photo of it and leave with a magnet for the fridge. But Stonehenge is not just an ancient circle of rocks. It is the echo of something much, much older, an enigma chiseled in time, a surgical incision in the bedrock of human origin. And it does not begin with the stones you see, but with the ones that came before. Because Stonehenge is not a single monument. They are many, superimposed, evolving, like a civilization trying to remember what it once knew. Let's analyze this. The current stones surround the famous trilithons, the iconic pillars with their lintels fitted like jaws, erected around 2500 BC. But the site itself dates back between 500 and 1,000 years earlier, perhaps more. Long before the stones, there were post holes, ditches, wooden markers, embankments, a plan drawn on the ground long before it was carved in stone. And what a plan! Stonehenge is not a messy circle. It is not a random arrangement. It is large-scale geometry. The circle is almost perfect. The stones are shaped, not just placed. The space between them is deliberate. The sarsens, those huge sandstone blocks, were transported from Marlborough Downs, 25 kilometers away. But the blue stones come from Wales, more than 240 kilometers away. Let's repeat it. 240 kilometers across rivers, hills and valleys without wheels, without cranes, without paved roads, only rough stones, some weighing up to 4 tons, dragged, floated, or rolled across prehistoric Great Britain. Why? To form a circle to impress the neighbors, to align with the sky, as Stonehenge is not just a circle. It is a clock, calendar, telescope of granite and earth. In the summer solstice, the rising sun aligns perfectly with the highest and most discrete stone that marks the boundary between the earth and the cosmos. If you stand in the center of the circle that morning, you will see the sun rise through the precise corridor formed by the highest stones. It is not an assumption. It is engineering. The builders did not just stack rocks. They were measuring time, and not only solar time. Lunar cycles are also encoded here. The positions of stones follow the 186-year cycle of the moon. That is the kind of data only obtained through long-term observations by generations of sky observers who record, predict, and build. But here's a twist. We do not know who they were. The culture that built Stonehenge left no writings, no names, no clear myths. All we have are bones, tools, and the stones themselves. And the stones say things that we are not intelligent enough to decipher yet. Let's talk about architecture. The trilithons, the horseshoe formed by pillars and a lintel, are not only impressive for their size. They are impressive because they are joined. The lintels are not balanced. They are joined by mortise and tenon joints, as if they were giant Lego pieces. The curvature of the circle is precise, that each lintel is uniquely carved to maintain the arch. This is not the work of amateurs. This is stonework at a level that we can barely imitate with modern tools. And yet, they tell us that it was built by Neolithic people with horn picks, wooden sleds, and free time. Sure, and perhaps the Mona Lisa was painted with finger paints by a blind man during blackout. Because the more one delves into planning, the more difficult to believe that this is a first attempt. Stonehenge is not the work of a civilization that is learning. It is the work of a civilization that remembers. Beyond the circle, there are more layers. The Kersusa, a huge linear earthwork more than a kilometer long, and the avenue, a ceremonial road aligned with the sunrise on the solstice. Then there are the tumuli, burial mounds that the countryside, some containing remains of elite people with grave goods from all over Europe. It was not just a monument. It was a necropolis, a ritual center, a node, and a network. And it may not have been the only one. Archaeologists have found other stone circles in Great Britain, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, many with similar solar and lunar alignments, similar construction techniques, some even older, such as the Ring of Brodgar, such as Avebury. It is almost as if the whole island was once a map, a star map, a palace of memory made of stone, a civilization that expressed itself not through an empire, but through architecture as language. But what were they saying? That is the part we have lost. Some say the circles were built for the dead. Others say they were places of healing. Some whisper that they have acoustic properties when one is at the center. Sound behaves strangely. Resonance, vibrations, frequencies that we do not fully understand. There is evidence of meetings, mass banquets, animal bones from all corners of the island. Pottery tools. People came here from far away not only to build, but to celebrate, to mourn, to mark time, and perhaps more. Maybe the place was a transmitter, a receiver, a signal tower. Not for messages, but for meanings. Because here's the question. No one builds something so big for no reason. Stones are not dragged through entire countries to make a pretty circle. It is done because something demands it. A vision, a voice, a memory. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't their vision. Maybe the builders of Stonehenge were heirs, like the Incas with Sacsayhuaman, like the Romans in Baalbek, like the Tiwanaku in Pumapunku. Perhaps they found the place, felt the energy, saw the alignments, and built on the bones of something older. Because under the current stones there are other older ones, wooden posts, circular ditches, sacred geometry engraved in the earth. This place has layers of sand. They go back beyond what we like to admit. So who started it? We do not know. And that is the question. Stonehenge is not just a monument. It is a wound, a place where time has bent, where history bleeds backwards, where the deeper we go, the less we understand. And just when you think it's safe to close the book, when you think that the fog of prehistory cannot get thicker, you remember something. There are stories, myths of a lost continent, of a submerged world, of a civilization so advanced that it became legend, of Atlantis, not just a city, but a civilization that gives meaning to all these ruins. And the story does not begin in stone. It begins with a philosopher and a warning. Atlantis, according to Plato. It begins with Plato, not with stone, nor with ruins, nor with a sunken city torn from the sea like a soaked conspiracy. No, Atlantis, the mother of all lost worlds, begins in a library in Athens. In the mind of a man who, by all indications, had no intention of creating a myth. Plato, the philosopher, the thinker, the guy who gave us the Republic, the allegory of the cave, the way that also gave us Atlantis, not as a bedtime story, but as a footnote in his dialogues with Muse and Critias, as a warning. According to Plato, Atlantis was not a fairy tale. It was history, a story that was transmitted to him through a chain of transmission. Solon, the Athenian legislator, traveled to Egypt 150 years earlier. There he met some priests who told him the story of a great civilization that had existed 9,000 years before that moment. A powerful empire that extended beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, a land blessed with resources, technology, knowledge, and arrogance. Atlantis, a continent, a naval power, a utopia turned into a machine of arrogance. And then the cataclysm, the fire, the earthquakes, the floods, a single day and a single night of misfortunes swallowed by the sea, disappeared. So what are we seeing here? A parable or a memory? Plato was not a fantasy novelist. He did not like fiction for fiction's sake. His writings were full of allegories. Yes, but the tone of his account of Atlantis is precise, specific, geographic. He names places, details, architecture, describes agricultural systems, engineering wonders, even the dimensions of the canals and ports. It is not about a vague mysticism. It is a report. He speaks of concentric rings of sand and water that alternate on a central island surrounded by circular moats connected by bridges. A great capital with temples and palaces and a god in its center, Poseidon. A temple dedicated to him, covered in precious metals that shone with orichalcum, a lost alloy that no one has ever been able to reproduce. The Atlanteans were not primitive. They had irrigation systems. They had advanced metallurgy. They had ships, armies, vast commercial networks. And they had ambition. According to legend, Atlantis tried to conquer the known world. Prehistoric, legendary Athens stood alone in challenge and won. And then, without warning, Atlantis was devastated. The conclusion of Plato. Civilizations arise, civilizations fall, even the greatest. Now, here comes the part that breaks the stories back. Plato dates the fall of Atlantis 9,000 years before Solon's time. That places it around the year 11,600 Agorite, at the end of the Younger Dryas. That same period in which ice melted, sea level rose, and the global climate went crazy. The same moment in which Göbekli Tepe was built. The same moment in which the myth of floods spread throughout all ancient cultures of Earth. Coincidence? There are many coincidences. Let's broaden the panorama. Ancient texts from all over the planet echo this pattern. In India, the Mahabharata speaks of flying machines, energy weapons, cities turned to ashes quickly. In Mesoamerica, the Popol Vuh speaks of multiple creations and destructions of man. The Sumerians wrote about the Great Flood. The Egyptians referred to Zep-Tepi as the first time when the gods ruled Earth. And here is Plato, calmly reporting that Atlantis was real and its destruction was not metaphor. It was a precedent. The critics arrive, of course. They say that Plato invented it, that it is an allegory, that it is a moral tale disguised as geography. And maybe it is, but then, where do the details come from? Why the details? Why the chronology of 9,000 years? Why link it to real places, to real measures? Why go so far? And more importantly, why does it fit? Because when the pre-flood anomalies scattered throughout the world are observed, Baalbek, Pumapunku, the pyramids, the sapum, Göbekli Tepe, Atlantis ceases to be a joke. It begins to look like a context, a lost world, a high-tech civilization. Not flying cars and glass skyscrapers, but a society that understood astronomy, geometry, and geophysics at a level we still struggle to reach. A society that encoded knowledge in stone, that left messages in alignments, proportions, and frequencies. A civilization that foresaw its own end. And here is the darkest possibility. What if Atlantis did not fall by accident? What if it caused its own destruction? There are rumors and myths scattered like breadcrumbs that hint at a forbidden knowledge, forces manipulated beyond control, lost energy sources, portals, grid systems, theories that sound like science fiction until you find yourself in front of 1,000-ton stones balanced with the precision of microchips. What if Atlantis was not only the origin of myth? What if it was the source code of ancestral memory? What if the flood was not a punishment, but a protocol? A complete restart. Erase the board. Let the survivors scatter. Let the stories degrade to religion, then legend, and finally bedtime stories. Let the temples sink. Let the towers collapse. Let knowledge hide in stone, in myth, in metaphor. Because here's the key. The stone does not lie. It does not exaggerate. It does not forget. It only waits. And when the waters recede, when the ice melts, when the species that forgot itself looks in amazement at the ruins, that the earth, Atlantis, will still be there. Not as a name, but as a question, pressure in the bones, knowledge behind the eyes, that we were not the first, that we will not be the last, and that somewhere under the waves, under the myths, under the bones of time itself, the answer keeps singing, waiting. And the next verse arises from the east, where another myth, another lost continent, waits silently. MW, Lemuria, call what you want, the echoes are the same. Lemuria, MW, mythological continent. East of memory, west of maps, somewhere in the fine mist between speculation and forgotten truth, lies another land that should not exist, but does not disappear. It has many names. MW, Lemuria, the mother country, the sunken kingdom, the lost world of the East. It is a continent that has never been found, but has never completely disappeared. Not in the minds of mystics, nor in the stories of sailors, nor in the coded myths of the peoples who still trace their origins to a time before the flood, before history, before oblivion. If Atlantis was the shattered crown of the West, MW is the echo of the East. A civilization not spoken of in ruins, but in riddles, not in stone, but in the soul. Let's begin with the story. In the 19th century, British zoologist Philip Slater observed something strange. Lemurs were present in both Madagascar and India, but not in Africa or the Middle East. This discontinuity in species distribution led him to propose the existence of a lost continental mass that once connected these regions, a land he called Lemuria. Science ended up attributing it to continental drift, and Lemuria disappeared from zoological relevance. But the name remained and took on a new life because, at the same time, other voices began to speak. They were not scientists, but seekers, mystics, channelers, students of theosophy. In 1864, French writer Louis Jacqueline claimed to have found ancient Tamil texts that referred to Rutas, an advanced continent sunk in the Indian Ocean. Later, Helena Blavatsky, founder of the Theosophical Society, popularized the idea of Lemuria as the cradle of an ancient, spiritually advanced civilization. They were not talking about biology. They were talking about beginnings. According to these traditions, Lemuria was not just a place. It was a womb, the birthplace of humanity, or at least a version of it. A land where ancient wisdom flourished, where telepathy was the norm, where people lived in harmony with natural energies, where temples were in tune with the vibrations of the earth. And the sun was not worshipped out of fear, but because it was understood as a symbol and source of power. This civilization not only cultivated and built, it resonated. It is said that the Lemurians had elongated skulls, imposing statures, and an advanced consciousness. They did not wage war. They remembered, and then they disappeared. Myths say it was a cataclysm. Some say it was earthquakes. Others say it was fire from the sky. Others say that the earth itself turned against them, swallowing their continent into the sea like a disappointed mother. Does it sound familiar? It should. It's Atlantis again, but this time in a different hemisphere, with different names, with different descendants. Because while the West inherited Atlantis, the East remembers Mu. In the traditions of Polynesia, Hawaii, Micronesia, and Easter Island, there are stories of a great land that once connected their scattered islands. A land where ancestors lived in splendor. A land that sank. In Tamil Nadu, India, there are stories of Kumari Kandam, an ancient Tamil civilization now lost beneath the waves. It was said that it extended from India to Australia, connecting cultures through a common language, knowledge, and lineage. In Japan, legends speak of dragon kings and sunken palaces. In Australia, Aboriginal stories of the dreaming refer to great floods and disappeared lands. In the Philippines, accounts of an ancient homeland echo in tribal memory. They all repeat the same theme. We came from the sea, but the sea took something from us. And if you follow the clues, delve into oral history, sacred texts, and pre-cataclysm architecture, you begin to wonder, was there a global civilization before this one? A vast, interconnected network of knowledge and culture lost in time and water? A civilization that did not build with steel and glass, but with stone, resonance, and memory? Skeptics scoff. They say that there is no evidence, that there is no continental landmass under the Indian Ocean that matches the size of a continent. But, again, when the sea rises, the earth does not leave a calling card. It leaves myths. And myths, as we have seen, do not lie. They encode. The megalithic sites of Southeast Asia, Polynesia, and the Indian subcontinent speak a language all their own. In Nan Madol, on the Micronesian island of Pohnpei, thousands of basalt columns were arranged to form a floating city. No one knows how or why. In Indonesia, Gunung Padang presents a pyramidal structure much older than accepted history allows, built on a volcanic hill with mysterious chambers and megalithic stones. On Easter Island, the Moai stand with their backs to the sea, guarding a lost memory. Their eyes, once embedded with coral, do not look at the ocean, but at the center of the island, as if protecting something hidden. And in the Indian Ocean itself, there are structures. Off the coast of India, submerged under the sea near Dwarka, lie ruins that suggest walls, steps, and artificially constructed rectangular formations. Scholars debate their age, but if the sea covered them, that can only mean one thing. They were there before the water came, and the water arrived fast. At the end of the last glaciation, sea level rose more than 120 meters. The coasts were redrawn overnight on a geological scale. Entire landscapes disappeared. Entire civilizations sank. And all that remains are the fragments they left above the floodline. Stone stars with stories to tell. Modern theosophists and mystics claim that Lemuria was more spiritually evolved than Atlantis. That while Atlantis focused on the technology of external power, Lemuria focused on the internal, on consciousness, on balance. They say that Lemuria did not fall into the fire, but into oblivion. Its knowledge was dispersed, not destroyed. Its temples were buried, not destroyed. That is why the myths persist. Because somewhere in our collective unconscious, we remember not details or names, but themes. Flood, fall, flames, flight. A cycle of ascent, construction, destruction, and sinking. And the stone always remains. The stone does not care who remembers it. It does not ask for belief, only waiting to be rediscovered. So maybe Lemuria never existed as a continent at all. Maybe it was Neverland. Maybe it was a state, a frequency, a bandwidth of civilization that operated on a different frequency than we have forgotten how to receive. Or maybe it was very real. Maybe it connected Madagascar with India, Polynesia, and Australia. Maybe it sank. Maybe its people did not disappear. Maybe they dispersed and populated the earth with stories, structures, and signs. Signs that we now call inexplicable, out of place the flood. But they are not mysteries at all. They are memories encoded in myths, engraved in stone, buried in time, waiting for the world to remember what it lost before losing everything again. And now the trail does not just twist. It plunges into a city, into a name whispered in ancient Sanskrit, a city that was once ruled by God, a city built on the shores of the sea and swallowed by it. Dvarka, off the coast of Gujarat, India. Submerged city. The sea does not return what it takes, except when it does. Off the west coast of India, where the Arabian Sea bathes the coasts of Gujarat, fishermen have long talked about strange things in the depths. Structures under the waves, stone steps, carved walls, roads disappearing into the blue. They knew it. They have always known it. But it was not until the late 20th century, when sonars and underwater archaeology began to pierce the ocean's veil, that the world in general heard that name again. Not as a myth, not as a metaphor, but as a place. Dvarka, the city of Krishna, a name taken directly from the Mahabharata. The great epic city of India, splendid and powerful, ruled by a god-king, described in great detail, mentioned in songs and revered in the scriptures. A city that, it is said, was built on the coast, and under it was filled with palaces of gold, avenues of precious stones, and walls that shone under the sun. And then, one day, the sea swallowed it. According to the Mahabharata, after Krishna's departure from the world, Dvarka was swallowed by the ocean in a single night. It disappeared just like that, without more. Myth, legend, perhaps, until some divers went into the Gulf of Combat and found carved stones arranged and aligned. They were not reefs or random rocks, but roads, squares, walls, a city, or at least the skeleton of one. Archaeologists found sandstone blocks placed in straight lines, steps carved into the rock, masonry in the form of a lintel, and even possible remains of dwellings or temples. The artifacts were followed by fragments of ceramics, fossilized wood, a piece of tooth, and a cutting tool that, according to controversies, dates from around 7500 CB. See, let's stop at that figure. If it is accurate, that places Dvarka almost 9,500 years ago, before the civilization of the Indus Valley, before Mesopotamia, before Egypt, which places Dvarka on the same impossible level as Geekseep and other pre-flood anomalies, a complex city submerged for millennia, a city that should not exist. Conventional archaeology received these findings with skepticism, of course, alleging contamination, misidentification, natural formations, the usual defenses. Because if Dvarka is so old, the story of a city devoured by the sea is not only mythology, but memory, and then everything changes. Because the Mahabharata not only describes the fall of Dvarka, but also its life, its technology, its layout, its politics, its wars. And those wars were not small. Flying machines and weapons of unimaginable force were used in them. Descriptions that read disturbingly like accounts of nuclear explosions, shock waves, and radiation. Entire cities turned to ashes. The skies darkened. The rivers were boiling. We are told that it is poetic license, a divine imagination. But what if it is not? What if the destruction of Dvarka was not just a flood? What if it was a punishment? Let's delve deeper. The Mahabharata describes Dvarka as a city that Krishna himself, the divine architect, shaped on the earth. It was fortified, circular, and designed with geometry and symbolism. It had palaces, public squares, temples, and civic infrastructure. It was not a fantasy. It was planned, and it had characteristics of something we have seen before. Advanced pre-flood architecture, sacred geometry, astrological alignment. Everything from Baalbek to Sacsayhuaman and Malta echoes in the description of Dvarka. And then came the end. When Krishna left the world, his avatar complete and mission accomplished, he predicted the ruin of the city. The ocean would come, the era would end, the curtain would fall. And so it was, not gradually, not by erosion or migration, but catastrophically. The sea swallowed Dvarka in one night. Like Atlantis, like Lemuria, the parallels are so evident that they seem like plagiarism through time. But what if it is not a coincidence? What if they're not different stories? What if they're the same story told again and again with different names in different lands by survivors who only retain fragments of what was before? Because myths about floods are everywhere. Mesopotamia, Sumeria, Egypt, Mesoamerica, the Pacific, the Arctic. And in India, they have a name, Pralaya, the Great Dissolution, a cosmic reset, a cleansing not only of cities but of civilizations, of eras. And here is the crux of the matter. Dvarka is not alone. The coasts of India are plagued with submerged anomalies. Puampahar, off the coast of Tamil Nadu, shows signs of submerged structures. The Adam's Bridge, also called Rama's Bridge or Ramsetu, extends from India to Sri Lanka in a formation that seems artificial, not natural. And satellite images reveal patterns under the sea that suggest the past is not buried under the earth, but under the water. A vast pre-flood world that disappeared in a matter of days. Let us remember that during the melting of the last glaciation, sea level rose more than 120 meters. Entire coastal cities would have disappeared. And where the first civilizations always formed. Near the water, near rivers, near coasts, near what are now continental platforms, submerged and silent. Therefore, the story of Dvarka is not marginal. It is a pattern, and that pattern is repeated again and again. A great city, an advanced civilization, a catastrophic flood, and only stones as a memory. Only myths, only memories. And yet it is not so, because Dvarka is being excavated piece by piece. The sea does not want to return it, but it is revealing its secrets. And each new sonar scan, each new artifact, makes the story more impossible and more undeniable. Perhaps Krishna was not a god as we define it. Perhaps he was a king, a scientist, a sage, a vestige of a lost world, trying to preserve what could not be saved, trying to guide a civilization through a collapse too great to stop. In Dvarka, perhaps it wasn't his kingdom. Perhaps it was his ark, a last bastion, a last memory, a temple dedicated to a time before time. Now, it is underwater, not destroyed, only hidden. And if it ever surfaces, if its secrets are shouted instead of whispered, the textbooks will have to be fireproofed. Because Dvarka is not just a city, it's a crack in the dam. And what is behind? A whole world that we left behind. And only a few hundred kilometers away, straddling two nations and even more layers of legend, is another impossible structure. Not under the sea, but in the sea. A bridge, a road, or something completely different. The Bridge of Adam, Rama Setu, and it refuses explanation. The Adam Rami Setu Bridge from India to Sri Lanka. There's a line in the sea. It can be seen from space. It crosses the Gulf of Mannar, an almost straight stretch between the southern end of India and the northwest coast of Sri Lanka. A chain of calcareous coasts, a trail of islands, a chain of sandbanks and submerged rocks so linear, so geometric, that it makes cartographers scratch their heads and historians scratch even more. They call it the Bridge of Adam. They call it Ramatu. They call it natural. But nobody really knows. It is not just a stretch of shallow sea. It is a corridor, a border, a scar. It extends over more than 30 kilometers and almost 20 m with an unsettling symmetry that refuses to be completely dismissed. Satellite images show it as a thin white snake in blue waters that curves gently like a causeway built by giants. And maybe that's what it was. Because according to one of the oldest stories known to mankind, that is exactly what it is. The Ramayana, the epic poem of India older than history and deeper than myth, narrates the story of the god Rama, an incarnation of Vishnu, and his quest to rescue his wife Sita from the demon king Rana, who had taken her to Lanka. But the road was blocked. There was an ocean between them. So Rama did what no mortal could. He built a bridge. Not only, but he commanded an army of Vanarazafin, translated as monkey men, but potentially something much older, stranger, and more advanced than is zoologically possible. They were not chimpanzees with chisels. They were engineers. And what they built was Ramitu, a bridge of stone and earth that extends from the Indian continent to Lanka, completed in a few days and capable of supporting an army. A miracle a myth, except that it is still there, is still visible, it still refuses to be just a story. And that is where the ground begins to shake. Because the Bridge of Adam is not just a curiosity, it's a tectonic crack in the narrative. It raises a question so uncomfortable that it is usually dismissed with a laugh. What if the Ramayana isn't a myth? What if it is a memory? Let's analyze the structure. The bridge is made up of a series of sandbanks and reefs located on a submerged ridge. Geological studies show the material is sandstone coral sediment accumulated on a base that appears artificially linear. Some sections rise above the sea, others sink just below, yet the alignment remains. Geologists say it is a natural formation, a series of barrier islands formed by tidal action, sediment drift, and wave activity over time. But natural formations aren't so straight. They do not keep an alignment of 20 meters despite changing currents and centuries of erosion. They do not hold underwater while stories spread throughout 2,000 years of literature. The question is this. The Ramayana describes the bridge with precision. It names that stretch of water. It describes the strategy used. It even says that the bridge was built with floating stones on which the name of Rama was inscribed, and that, it is said, defied gravity by divine will. That is poetic indeed, but there is something that isn't. In parts of the region, there are floating stones. Pumice, yes. Volcanic, rare but existent. And they are found in a place that geologically should not have much volcanic activity. However, floating stones reach the shore. Fishermen tell their stories. Locals keep them in sanctuary still. They say these stones are sacred, and science says they shouldn't be here. Which makes us wonder, is it a coincidence or a strange phenomenon? Or are they fossilized footprints of a story that once was real? Let's think big here. If Rama is artificial or even partially built, then we're facing the oldest known bridge on Earth, possibly 7,000 years old, perhaps even more, long before known Indian civilization, before the Vedas, before the Harappans, before writing. And it is not just about engineering alone, but also about logistics. Building a 32-kilometer bridge over sea requires planning, resource management, labor coordination, and architectural knowledge. Even if it was compacted sand and rocks, it would take scale and vision, meaning someone had all that. Someone predate, someone who is not part of the accepted narrative. And maybe it wasn't just humans, because the Ramayana does not describe a normal world. It speaks of flying machines called vimanas, of weapons that shine, blind, and resonate with thunder, of cities in the clouds, and of a time that moves differently depending on the path taken. Those aren't metaphors. They are descriptions only. Descriptions that read like fragmented memories of a technological civilization that fell into myth because nothing else could sustain it. And the last piece left behind, a bridge, is still standing, visible, and being measured. Even NASA recognized it in satellite images, though cautiously calling it a natural formation. Not because they have proven it, but admitting otherwise would shake the very foundations of accepted history. And it goes even further. According to scriptures, the bridge was passable on foot until a few thousand years ago. Historical records from medieval Islamic explorers mention an elevated road connecting India with Lanka. Even the first colonial maps call it Adam's Bridge, linking it to the Islamic belief that Adam, the first man, crossed there after being expelled from Eden. So now we have Hindu, Islamic, and Judeo-Christian traditions that coincide in a geographical anomaly. Everyone remembers the bridge, but no one agrees on why it's there. Coincidence, then? Sure thing. If your tolerance for coincidences is astronomical, the real horror isn't that the bridge exists, but what it implies. That human beings are something like beings who build huge projects to connect continents, when we were supposed to still be hunting mammoths with spears. That ancient civilizations were not isolated pockets of primitive life at all. They were connected. They had maps, commercial routes, migratory paths, knowledge. And when the sea rose, when the flood arrived, they did not vanish. They sank. Their cities, their roads, their bridges buried like Dwarka, Atlantis, Lemura. Ramesses II is not the only stone bridge. is the last visible vestige of a world that existed once. A world that should not exist. A world that we cannot explain. That is why we call it myth. But the stone does not care. The stone remains. And when you take a step back, when you move the camera away, you realize that we have been looking at the ruins. Now is the time to look at roots. Because in the deserts of the Middle East, far from the ocean shore, is the first city. It is not a town or camp. It is a city older than the Bible, older than memory. And the ancients said that here was where the royalty of heavens descended. Eridu Ziggurat, ancient Mesopotamia. Under the modern dust of southern Iraq, beyond the beaten paths of history books, lies a ghost. A ruin older than ruins. A city older than the cities. Eridu. For most, it is a forgotten name in the archaeological sites of Sumer. But in the ancient cuneiform records, Eridu was not just a place. It was the first place, cradle of kings, mother of cities, the beginning. And that makes it dangerous. Because if Eridu was really the first city, as the list of Sumerian kings claims, it did not begin in Mesopotamia, according to history as we know it. It began in prehistory. The list of kings does not mince words. It begins with a phrase that should make all historians sit up straight. When the royalty descended from the sky, it was in Eridu. It did not evolve, was not born, was not discovered, it descended. It was a gift, a transmission, a transfer. And the first king of Eridu, Aluum, is said to have reigned for 28,800 years. Yes, you heard that right. Not 28, not 280, 28,800. A number so absurd that it becomes terrifying again. Because either the Sumerians were wildly mythologizing, or they were remembering something so vast, so deep, so ancient that it could only be expressed in cosmic time. Eridu was not just a city. It was the Sumerian Eden, literally. The name Eridu means distant home or remote dwelling. It was located where the Tigris and the Euphrates meet, near the Persian Gulf, a region that, before the sea level rose, may have housed much more than mud brick temples and reed huts. And in its center stood a ziggurat, one of the first ever built. Not the imposing wonders of Babylon or Eridu. The ziggurat was smaller, more primitive, but that is the point. It was the prototype, the first sacred mound, the original mountain of man. The ziggurat of Eridu was dedicated to Enki, god of water, wisdom, and creation. Enki, who lived in the Abzu, the underground realm of fresh water. Enki, who shaped humanity with clay. Enki was at the same time a deceiver and teacher. Enki, who always dwelled in the depths. This is not just mythology. It is architecture, because the ziggurat was not just a temple. It was a cosmic diagram, a bridge between the sky and the earth, an artificial mountain imitating the primeval mound that rose from the chaos of creation, a place where gods and mortals could meet. In other words, it was a palace of memory, a three-dimensional myth, a story built in stone told not with words, but with scale. And here's where things get crazy. Some researchers believe that Eridu may have been founded as early as 5,400 BCE. See, others go further, much further. They maintain that Eridu sits on older, hidden layers, buried architecture straight up prior to the flood, submerged history. You will see, according to Sumerian tradition, there were cities before the flood. Eridu was the first, but not the last. And when the flood arrived, it did not destroy these cities like a wildfire. It drowned them slowly, mercilessly, like a reset button pressed by nature or God, or both. And nevertheless, Eridu survived, or at least its memory, because even after the flood, the Sumerians kept returning to it, rebuilding it, and venerating it. They never abandoned it. Not entirely. Which raises the question, was Eridu only the first city? Or was it the last beacon, a lifeboat for knowledge? A place where everything that survived the cataclysm, all the wisdom, all the mathematics, all the languages could be transmitted. Here is something else to consider. The architecture of Eridu Ziggurat resembles the pyramidal platforms around the world. The Mesoamerican pyramids, the stepped pyramids of Egypt, the terraced constructions of Indonesia, the layered sanctuaries of India, even the ancient burial mounds of Europe, different continents, same geometry. Why? Because the form follows function. Or perhaps form follows memory. The tears of the ziggurat were not only to rise. They were symbolic. The earth, the sky, the stars, the body, the mind, the spirit, the past, the present, the future. And the temple of Eridu was always at the top. The house of Enki, the well of wisdom. And what is wisdom without a fall? Because Eridu did not last. Over time, it was abandoned, left to its fate, devoured by the sand, forgotten until archaeologists unearthed it again in the 20th century. They found a mound, adobe structures, ceramics, tools, foundations of temples stacked on top of older temples, each built to crown the ruins of the previous one. A palimpsest. But they did not find the most important thing, the truth. Because the truth does not fossilize. It haunts. And Eridu haunts the history of civilization like a ghost ship adrift in time. Because if the list of kings is even partially true, then everything we think we know about the dawn of humanity is wrong by thousands of years. If royalty descended, it means that civilization did not evolve from agriculture. It was interrupted, erased, restarted, and then resumed in Eridu, in Sumer, in the ziggurat, built for a god who lived under the waters. A god who perhaps once ruled a world that no longer exists. And perhaps, just perhaps, Eridu was its beacon. The place where the survivors arrived on the coast. The place where memory came alive. The place where myth became method. So no, the ziggurat of Eridu is not a ruin. It is a record, one that refuses to burn, one that whispers of civilizations deeper than Earth. And as you stand among the dust and broken bricks under a sun that has not changed in 10,000 years, a thought assails you. This is not the beginning. This is what survived the end. And what is beyond there? A land where memory was not preserved on clay tablets or step temples, but in the stones themselves, unwritten, untranslated, unexplained. Great Zimbabwe, great Zimbabwe. It rises unexpectedly, without pyramidal majesty, without silhouettes of imposing ziggurats, only dry stone walls, thick curves that stretch across the golden savanna of southern Africa like the ribs of an ancient beast sleeping under the sun. This is great Zimbabwe, and it should not exist. Not like this. Not here. That is what the settlers thought. When they first discovered it in the 19th century, it was too sophisticated, too big, too deliberate. They could not believe it had been built by the local population. They said they had to be Phoenicians or Arabs or someone with a beard on a plane. But it was not like that. The Africans built it. And even today, that truth continues to cause unease, not because it challenges colonial narratives, but because it hints at something deeper, something older than we are allowed to recognize. Because Great Zimbabwe is a paradox. It is both. Known and unknown, famous and ignored, visible and inexplicable. Let's analyze it. The ruins cover almost 800 hectares, about the size of a small city. At its peak, the site could house 18,000 people. There are three main architectural areas: the hill complex, the great enclosure, and the valley ruins. The hill complex is the oldest, built atop a granite outcrop. It is fortified, sacred, and strategic. The great enclosure is the most emblematic wall, with more than 250 m in circumference and up to 11 m in height. In some points, it is built without mortar, only with carefully carved granite blocks stacked in harmony with each other, dry-fitted like pieces of a puzzle created by a stonemason god. The valley ruins contain domestic structures, workshops, and echoes of daily life. But here is the key. There are no plans, no central plan, no writings, no detailed records, just stone. And stone, as always, remembers everything. Let's talk about construction. The walls were built without mortar. That is important. It means that they depended on precision. The stones, some enormous, had to be perfectly carved and balanced to stand. And they have been standing for more than 700 years, perhaps more. And we're not just talking about defense. They are not castle walls. They are symbolic. The curves of the great enclosure mimic the cosmos movement. The chevron and herringbone patterns carved into the stone are not just decorative. They are coded, directional, possibly astronomical. And then there's the conical tower. Inside the great enclosure, a solid stone tower rises 10 meters high. Without entrance, interior chamber, or clear function, it's a monument to something. It is not a watchtower. It is not a grain silo. It is ritual, a cosmic fallacy, an energy conduit, a symbol of continuity. You choose. What matters is that it does not belong to the tool set of primitive builders. It belongs to something else, something remembered. Because Great Zimbabwe did not appear from nowhere. It was part of a network. Hundreds of small stone settlements connected this region. Many are now gone. The trade routes extended from the interior to the Indian Ocean coast. And they did not trade with sticks or beads. They traded gold, ivory, iron, porcelain from China, glass beads from Persia, coins from Arabia. It was global. It was civilized. And yet, there are no writings, parchments, or royal decrees engraved in stone, only ruins. And then there is the name Zimbabwe, derived from the Shona words Zimba Zimbabwe, stone houses. But the name predates the nation. The ruins gave the country its name backwards because these were the houses of the ancestors, the elders, those who built with stone, memory, and silence. Let's talk about mystery. Carbon dating places Great Zimbabwe's peak between the 11th and 15th centuries A.D.C. That's what they tell us. But oral tradition is elusive. It whispers of earlier times, older structures, deeper foundations. Some say Great Zimbabwe was built on something older, that the stone enclosures were not the beginning, but the end. That the true knowledge, the origin, was buried, not forgotten. And this is where the pre-Diluvian signal breaks through interference. Because the layout of Great Zimbabwe suggests a lost alignment. The walls do not point to modern cardinal points, but to celestial events already past. Equinoxes, solstices, positions of stars that no longer rise where they used to. That means either the builders had a different cosmological map, or they were building based on ancestral knowledge inherited from a people who did see the stars from that angle. People from before the sky changed, before the floods, before the great forgetting. Does it seem exaggerated to you? Then think about the pattern. All over the world, stone civilizations suddenly emerge with astronomical alignments, megalithic architecture, sacred geometries, without preparation or a learning curve. It's as if someone pressed the play button on a forgotten plan. And Great Zimbabwe fits perfectly, an advanced outpost of an advanced civilization in a place where no one expected it. A city of gold hidden behind stone walls and colonial denial. And when it was finally discovered, it was too advanced to be believable, too clean, too intentional. So the world filed away, not as evidence, but as a problem. A problem that resonates across every continent. Because from Great Zimbabwe, the stones do not stop. They twist north, towards the Mediterranean, towards the island of Sardinia, towards towers, towards Nurag, towards more dry stone impossibilities. And the whisper grows louder. It is not a series of ruins. It is a network, a map, a memory of something we were, something vast, something impossible, and that still waits to be remembered. Nurag from Sardinia. In the middle of the Mediterranean, on an island sculpted by time and wind, there's a silence that hums. Sardinia. Hills whitened by the Sunday sun, steep coasts, sheep that the highlands like woolly punctuation marks. It doesn't seem like a place where the impossible could happen. It seems rustic, calm, almost untouched. But then you see it, a stone shadow rising above the landscape. It is not a castle or a fortress. It is a round, cyclopean, prehistoric tower, and it is not the only one. There are thousands scattered throughout the island like ancient lighthouses for a lost sea. They are the Nuragi, the unresolved enigma of Sardinia. Without inscriptions, a defined purpose, a known origin, only structure. A powerful, silent structure. And the question that won't disappear. What kind of civilization builds 7,000 megalithic towers on an island and leaves no explanation behind? Let's start with basics. The nuragi, plural of nurig, are megalithic stone towers built without mortar, using dry stone engineering. Some reach heights of 18 meters. Their base is typically circular, narrowing inward as they rise. Inside, they house vaulted domes, narrow stairs, chambers, and corridors. Some are independent, others form complexes. Some are connected by low walls and village layouts. Others are grouped in a star shape at strategic points of the island. All are ancient, and none should exist. The most accepted estimates date the nuragi to between 1800 and 800 BCE, and attribute them to the Nuragic civilization, a culture about which we know almost nothing. There are no books, tablets, or parchments, only ceramics, tools, and the bones of the people who lived in the shadow of stone. But here is a problem. That dating is imprecise, since it is based on layers of artifacts found near the ruins, not inside. There is no exact date for when the first nurig was built, and many of them seem older than old, worn not by centuries, but by epochs. Their stones have eroded as if they had faced glaciers, floods, and even geological shifts. Some lean as if the ground beneath them had shifted not in years, but centuries. Could they be older? Much older? Could they belong to a world that existed when sea level was lower? When the coasts were wider and civilizations spread across continents, now fragmented? Because Sardinia was not always an island. Not as it is now. During the last glacial maximum, about 20,000 years ago, sea level was over 120 meters lower. Sardinia and Corsica were a large continental landmass, possibly connected by shallow waters to the European continent. And guess what? There is a geological theory that the entire central Mediterranean was once a vast fertile basin that slowly flooded as glaciers melted and oceans rose. If true, Sardinia would not have been a remote island, but a nerve center, a capital of something grand. Let's go back to towers. Today, approximately 7,000 nuragi are known, but aerial studies and new scanning technology suggest there could be more than double still buried or eroded beyond recognition. Think about it. That's one tower every 2 or 3 kilometers across the entire island. It is no coincidence. It is infrastructure. It is a system. And it makes you wonder, what were these for? Defense. They lack distinctive traits of war towers. Too many sit in awkward positions. They're not always elevated. Many nestle in valleys. Their lines of sight are bad for archery or surveillance. Storage. They are stone, cold, humid, not ideal for storing grain. Ceremonies, possibly. Some align with celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, lunar cycles. There is rhythm in their location that suggests astronomy. But not just any. Astronomy. Megalithic astronomy. Prehistoric star maps engraved on Earth by people who observed and studied the skies. Some researchers have proposed that the nuragi form a geodesic network, that they mark energy nodes, that they reflect constellations, that Sardinia was once an observatory, not a telescope, but a terrestroscope, a stone machine, and that the people who built it disappeared. Even the name Nuragico is a reversed formation. We call them that because of their constructions, not the reverse. That is backwards. Civilizations are not named after their ruins, unless that's all they have left, unless it is the only thing we have found or the only thing to have survived. And this is where darkness creeps in, because the nuragi look like bunkers, shelters, towers built not to dominate, but to endure. What were they waiting for? What were they hiding from? Or what were they remembering? Some are surrounded by water systems, wells, drains. Others seem built to harmonize with natural geology, faults, magnetic anomalies, underground currents. Some theorists suggest that the nuragi were neither fortresses nor temples. They were condensers, devices, receivers built to connect with Earth. Part of a planetary network that once spanned the globe. You scoff, but then you remember that the same masonry appears in Peru, in Egypt, in Turkey, in Japan, in Malta. The same precision in the dry stone, the same corbel domes, the same impossible masonry. How? Independent invention or inherited memory? What if the Nuragi builders belonged to a larger world? A world before the flood? A world that fell in Sardinia? What if Sardinia was a lifesaver? A plateau, a vestige of Atlantis or Lur, or whatever you want to call the world that existed before this world? Because myth remembers even when maps do not. In local Sardinian legend, there are stories of giants, ancient builders, stone literos, not monsters but ancestors. And the Nuragi were their homes, temples, tombs. We call it myth because we fear what it could mean, because we cannot prove that giants existed. But neither can we explain how 40-ton stones were stacked, without mortar, using only bronze tools. So we draw a line in sand, and the story ends where doubt starts. But the Nuragi don't care. They stand in the fields, on ridges, in forests, in silence, and say nothing because they have already said everything, only that we've forgotten the language. And when you stand in its shadow and feel the wind whistling through the gaps, it doesn't look like a ruin. It looks like a warning, because on the other side of the sea, another formation awaits. A geological wonder, a mathematical joke, a natural impossibility that looks like intention. The Calzada de los Gigantes. Calzada de los Gigantes in Northern Ireland. On the north coast of Ireland, where basalt cliffs plunge into a gray sea, there is a place that looks like an error, as if someone dropped a geometry cube on the shore. Thousands of hexagonal, octagonal columns, too angular to be accidental, protrude from the earth like a keyboard of a forgotten god. Some rise like organ pipes, others lie like stones for crossing the waves. It extends toward the sea, ordered like a brick road, arrogant like a half-finished bridge. The Calzada de los Gigantes. Officially, it's a natural wonder. Unofficially, a blatant provocation. It's the kind of thing you see and immediately dismiss. Too strange, too perfect, too obviously designed. And yet, we are told that it's all natural. The result of ancient volcanic activity. Basaltic lava cooled under the right conditions and contracted into polygons as it solidified. It happens all the time, they say. But let's stop here. Have you ever seen chaos birth order? Have you ever seen entropy produce design? Because that's what we're talking about, not random rocks or irregular debris. We're talking about uniformity, repetition, structural rhythm. Tens of thousands of interlocking stone columns, most with 6 sides, some 12 meters high, others forming steps leading straight to sea. That's not just geology. It is architecture. And this is where the legend comes into play. Noisy, clumsy, and poetic. Irish myth says that the causeway was built by a giant named Fon Mac, come hail, better known as Finn McCool. He needed a bridge to get to Scotland and fight another giant named Benendon. So he built one with his own hands by throwing stone slabs in the sea. A causeway of colossal stones. A pretty story. Very Nordic. Very fanciful. But why this story? Why this structure? Why not a mountain, a cave, or a forest? Because even the first men who saw the causeway knew it was unnatural. It looked built. It looked designed. It screamed intelligence. And so, in the absence of science, they used the only thing big enough to explain it. Giants. But what if they weren't that far off? Not giants with beards and clubs, but giants of time. Beings from before the current era. Builders not only in size, but in scope. Minds that carve the stone not to take refuge, but to leave their mark. Let's look more closely now. The causeway is not isolated at all. There are similar basalt columns in Scotland, Iceland, the Faroe Islands, and elsewhere. Volcanism is indeed real. The lava cools and cracks, but never quite like that. Not on this scale, not with such precision. These columns seem built, their tips polished by the sea, and their regular shapes disturbing. You could pave a whole city with them. You could easily build a tower. You could build a signal fire. Because here is a theory that no one wants to say aloud. What if the Giant's Causeway was built, molded, or changed? What if ancient civilizations not only built on land, but used volcanic processes to create a megalithic code? What if this was not a bridge for giants, but a message to survivors? Think of a formation that can be seen from the sea, from the land, and, if you stack it high enough, from the sky. A series of polygonal blocks aligned not only with each other, but possibly with points in the sea in front of Fingal's Cave in Scotland, which repeat the exact same formation, as if they were part of a shattered corridor. A sonic resonance, because yes, the columns do resonate. If you strike them in the right place, they sound. An instrument, a map, a circuit board abandoned by a species that works stone, fire, and waves. And if that seems crazy to you, remember what else we have seen? We have seen stones at Pumapunku cut with mechanical precision. We have seen 1,000-ton blocks in Baalbek lifted and placed like Lego bricks. We have seen the granite boxes of Capium molded with precision to fractions of a millimeter. So when we see tens of thousands of columns placed like a mosaic on a coastal promontory, do we really keep saying, "Oh, nature did that"? Even the ancients knew much better, and they didn't work with microscopes, lidars, or sonars. They simply looked and felt that it was about something that had been left behind, something far bigger. And that's where mythology goes from being a fairy tale into evidence. Because Finn McCool not only built a causeway there, he lived here in the very memory of the earth. He shaped all of it. The nearby formations, the organ, the giant's boot, the wishing chair, are not only named for their appearance, but for what they suggest. A place that was once inhabited by scales, by myths, by a knowledge so great that it could only be explained as divine. And what happens to such divine knowledge? It is buried, drowned, or burned. So maybe the Giant's Causeway is what survived, not as infrastructure, but as proof itself. And like all good evidence, it is hidden in plain sight, masked as nature because that is how it hides from any flood. It is built from stone. The sea is allowed to polish its memory. Skeptics are allowed to call it geology, while the monument endures in silence, waiting for eyes open enough to truly see it. And if you still think that's too much, just think about this. The causeway is built using hexagons. Hexagons are the most naturally resistant shape. Even bees use them. Crystals and carbon too. Even Saturn's North Pole shows a hexagonal storm. Hexagons are efficiency incarnated. They do not randomly appear in structures of this size, unless someone actually wants it. So maybe it wasn't just Finn. Maybe it was the last gasp of a dying age. Perhaps it was a monument to memory anchored to bedrock, carved by fire and cooled in a code. And perhaps, if we saw the complete pattern, it would reveal a map, story, or warning. But the water keeps its secrets, and the wind only laughs. And when we ask the stone what it means, it says nothing because it has already told us. It is only waiting for us to remember how to listen. And while the Giant's Causeway rises above the sea, the next anomaly hides below, submerged, silent, and road-shaped. Not in Olanda, not in Europa, but in the warm and blue waters of the Atlantico. Off the coast of the Bahamas, where the line between land and myth blurs like sunlight on water. The Bimini Road. Underwater roads off Bimini, Bahamas. Under the crystalline waters of the Caribbean, where the sky merges with the ocean and the horizon forgets where up is, something waits. It is not a shark, nor a shipwreck, nor buried treasure. It is a road, a perfect road that stretches across the seabed. Giant rectangular stones cut and fitted together. Some cracked like sun-dried clay, others fitted like teeth. It does not meander. It extends. Clean lines, clean angles. It extends for more than a kilometer, framed in symmetry and silence. This is the Bimini Road, and it is impossible. They will tell you it is natural. They will tell you that tectonics cracked a slab of beach rock, that erosion reduced it to perfect polygons, that the currents aligned them over time in a suspiciously sidewalk-like shape for titans. A coincidence, they say, but your eyes know it is not so. Your instinct screams louder because it does not seem natural. It looks like the edge of something ancient, something erased, something left behind by a civilization that disappeared or was disappeared. Let's go back. In 1968, a pilot flying over the island of North Bimini saw something strange in the shallow waters, a submerged, rectangular, organized pattern. Divers were sent. What they found unleashed a storm. Huge blocks of stone arranged like pavement, with right angles and gaps that evoked an artificial construction. It was not only the size of the blocks, some more than 4 meters long and several tons in weight. It was their order, their pattern, their location. And most surprisingly, this discovery occurred exactly where Edgar Cayce, the so-called sleeping prophet, had predicted that the remains of Atlantida would be found. Decades earlier, in a state of trance, Cayce had said that parts of Atlantida would resurface near Bamini in the late 1960s. The right year, the right place, the right type of anomaly? Coincidence or clue? Let's delve deeper. Literally. Subsequent dives revealed more stone structures in the vicinity. Pillar bases, additional rows, and beneath the Bamini Road itself, a second layer of stone, more organized, more unnatural. As if what we see now is only the roof of something underneath. Not a road, but a roof. Think about it. What if what we call a road was simply the top layer of a submerged structure? What if there were more rooms, corridors, chambers buried under the sediments, trapped in time, crushed by the weight of 10,000 years? Because that is the time period that we are discussing. The Bimini Road is 6 meters underwater. But at the end of the last glaciation, around 10,000 BC. The sea level was hundreds of meters lower and the entire Bahamas bank was exposed. A vast plain of habitable, warm, fertile, and vanished land. If there were cities there, we would not know. We would not see them because they are now under ocean. And that is exactly where Cayce said Atlantis would be. He even called Poseidia the western part of Atlantis, located in that region. So we have two options remaining. Either Cayce had absurd luck, or he was taking advantage of something forgotten. And it's not only him. There are old maps, such as those of Pyre Reis, that show coasts and land masses that should be unknown. Islands in the Atlantic that no longer exist. Shallow plateaus where deep waters now churn. Lines that coincide with submerged features of the Earth only visible to satellites. But somehow drawn in the 16th century, somehow known. And then there is Plato. He said that Atlantis was beyond the Pillars of Hercules. That it was an island empire. That it fell in a single day and night of disgrace, sinking under the sea. Not over centuries, nor through decline. One day like the Bimini Road, and suddenly gone. And let's not forget that this road connects to nothing. It is not a road to any city. It is isolated, a floating ribbon of logic in a chaotic landscape, like a puzzle piece without a board. Unless, of course, the rest of the board is under 9 meters of coral and sediment. Unless the rest of the city sank, there are more anomalies nearby. The Andros Platform, the Yonaguni Monument, the structures off the coast of Cuba, huge geometric shapes, underwater pyramids, possible complete urban network seen with sonars, but never excavated fully. Why? Because underwater archaeology is difficult. Because funding is limited. Because the implications are radioactive. Because if the Bimini Road is real, if it is artificial, then someone was building a monumental stone infrastructure at a time when human beings were supposed to still wear loincloths and sharpened spears. That not only rewrites history, but erases it. And perhaps that is the aim. Because roads are connections. They are not destinations. They connect. They imply a bigger whole, a network, a civilization that moved, traded, and emigrated. And if there was a road in Bimini, where was it headed? To Cuba, to Yucatan, to the Azores, to the submerged mountain ranges of the Middle Atlantic? What if the road was part of an Atlantis network? A network of land bridges and stone causeways that linked cities across the submerged world? And here comes the existential blow. If sea level was so low just 12,000 years ago, then most of the earliest human cities are now underwater. Not lost, not mythical, just wet. Which means we've been digging in the wrong places, searching on land, looking up when we should have dove. Because stone withstands salt. Stone withstands pressure. The stone does not lie. And when you swim to the Bimini Road with a fogged mask and heart beating hard and see those stones opening towards the blue, you feel it. It is not imagination or fantasy. It is recognition. The memory in your bones screams, this is real. This is us. This is what we were and what we forgot. Because the sea not only drowns cities, but stories too. It drowns the truth. and only the stones remember it. But the Bimini Road does not only point backwards. It points forward because now we know where to look, because now we know what to ask. And the next anomaly does not wait under the sea. It is found dry and worn by time on the Giza Plateau. The body of a lion, the face of a man, and watermarks on the sides whisper of rain that has not fallen in 10,000 years. The Sphinx. The Sphinx. Egypt. Look in silence, monolithic without blinking. The Great Sphinx of Giza is not only old, it is more than old. It does not even try to explain itself anymore. It is simply there, half lion, half man, all mystery, sculpted in the bedrock of the Giza Plateau. It does not stand on the earth. It is the earth molded into something impossible. They tell us that the Sphinx was built around 2500 BC. See, that it was commissioned by the pharaoh Khafre, which is nothing more than another gravestone in a necropolis of inflated egos. But that story does not hold up. It does not fit. It does not explain the where, the erosion, the enigma engraved in each grain of its battered sandstone face. Because the thing is, the Sphinx seems older than Egypt, older than the pyramids, older than civilization. It is not only old, it is anomalous. Let's start with the most obvious clue, the erosion. When the geologist Dr. Robert Schoch examined the Sphinx in the early 1990s, he was not looking for headlines. He was just studying the rock, but what he saw left him speechless. The body of the Sphinx is not eroded by wind and sand, the type of wear that one would expect in a desert climate. It is eroded by water, vertical undulations, rounded contours, rain erosion. But Egypt has not had significant and sustained rainfall in more than 9,000 years. That places the construction of the Sphinx at least in 700 BC. C, perhaps even in 10,000 BC. C, and suddenly we're no longer talking about dynastic Egypt. We are in the shadow of the Ice Age. We are before the flood, before agriculture, in prehistory, and what is even stranger, the head. The head of the Sphinx is disproportionately small compared to the body. It seems out of place, as if it did not belong there, as if it had been recarved. And that is exactly what many researchers believe, that the original Sphinx could have had the head of a lion or some other mythological beast, and that later it was recarved with the image of a pharaoh when the dynastic Egyptians inherited the place. They did not build the Sphinx. They found it, and that makes them not architects, but caretakers. So, who built the original and why? Because the Sphinx is not just a sculpture. It is aligned precisely with the true East. It looks directly at the rising sun on the spring equinox. And on the spring equinox, around 10,500 BC, when the constellation of Leo rose with the sun, the Sphinx would have looked directly at its celestial counterpart. Leo, the lion. The age of the lion. Coincidence or signature? Because ancient architecture does not make coincidences. It makes alignments, intentions, symbolisms so dense that your teeth hurt. Every angle matters. Every shadow tells a story. And the story of the Sphinx is not a tomb marker. It is a clock, a message in stone, a snapshot of the sky at a time when the earth was different, when the seas were lower, when ice still covered the poles, when the civilization that sculpted this beast in the bedrock knew the stars, not as poetry, as data, but destiny. And we have not even touched the subsoil, because under the Sphinx hides another mystery, or perhaps more. For decades there have been rumors, backed by ground-penetrating radar and seismic scanners, that there are cavities under the Sphinx, chambers, corridors, possibly rooms. And some believe that it is not just empty spaces. They are a library, an archive. Plato wrote about things like that. So did the ancient Egyptians. A hidden chamber containing the knowledge of a long-disappeared civilization. Not parchments nor books. Knowledge encoded in geometry, in vibrations, in a language forgotten before being remembered. The very myths of Egypt speak of Zept the first time, an era in which the gods walked among men, when civilization was a gift, not an invention. It is said that the Sphinx is from that era, not from the era of men, but from the era of memory, of pre-memory. And the Sphinx is the key, a guardian, a threshold, a test. Because if you accept that it is older than Egypt, older than writing, older than all the textbooks ever written, what does that say about us? What does that say about what we have lost? Because the Sphinx was not built to be seen. It was built to survive, to withstand floods, sandstorms, time, to remain there and wait until we were prepared to ask the right questions. And we are just beginning to ask them. Why was it carved from a single piece of stone? Why does its body present the same erosion that is only found in the Nile Falls? Why is its head the wrong size? Why are the proportions incorrect? Because maybe they are not. Maybe the proportions made sense before they recarved it, before it stopped raining, before history was reset. And then there is the temple. The temple to the Sphinx, adjacent to the monument, is made of limestone blocks weighing 200 tons. The same material was excavated around the Sphinx's body. They didn't just carve the Sphinx. They recycled the bedrock to build a temple, integrated architecture, modular design, and remember, these blocks were placed with a precision that we still struggle to replicate today. With what? Copper chisels. Stone hammers. Come on, this is not erosion. It's erasure. We are contemplating the remains of a civilization that not only built with stone, but thought about it deeply. They spoke in it and left behind the Sphinx not as a monument, but as a mirror, a reminder of what we were, of what we could be again, and of what it terrifies us to remember. Because the truth does not live only in books. It lives in silence, in the gaps, in the shadows carved by ancient hands in rocks so old that they have forgotten their names. The Sphinx is not explained. It challenges us to try. And if we ever open the underground chambers, if we ever read the code engraved in the grain of its bones, perhaps we will discover that we were not the first ones, nor the best, nor the most outstanding, only the last restart of story told in floods, flames, and stone. And while the Sphinx looks east towards eternity, another anomaly awaits us. Not sculpted nor built, but collapsed. A sea swallowed in a single roar. A new myth, a new flood. But not in the Mediterranean. In the Black Sea, in the depths of the Black Sea, the surface seems calm now. Unassuming. A wide blue expanse nestled between Europe and Asia. A sea like any other. Fishing boats adrift. Cargo ships creaking on the horizon. Seagulls scream in all languages. But below it is dead. Not figuratively, but literally. Below a certain depth, actually 150 m, the Black Sea is anoxic. Without oxygen, without life. A tomb of dark and silent water where nothing survives there. It is the largest megalithic basin in the world, which means that its layers do not mix. The bottom waters are locked in stasis, without contact with air or sun. And that's not just creepy, it's preservation. Anything that sinks into the depths of the Black Sea does not decompose there. It doesn't rot. Wait. And waiting, buried under mud and myth, may be one of the greatest catastrophes in human history. A flood. Not just any flood. The flood. The one we remember is that of Noah. The one the Sumerians recorded with Zayusidra. The one that is told in whispers on all continents, from Gilgamesh to Manu and the Hopi. And in the Black Sea, we may have found the smoking gun. Let's go back to the end of the last Ice Age, about 12,000 years ago. The glaciers were melting. The oceans rose slowly at first, then faster. At that time, the Black Sea was not a sea at all. It was a freshwater lake far below sea level, without an outlet and serene. The Mediterranean was higher in elevation. And then, one day that stopped. The Mediterranean overflowed its banks. The sea broke the natural dam of the Bosphorus Strait. And boom, the salt water crossed the gap like a biblical tsunami, pouring into the Black Sea basin with such violent fury that it could have excavated submarine canyons in a matter of hours. Estimates suggest the sea rose hundreds of meters, swallowing over 60,000 square miles of land in days or weeks. Fertile plains, river valleys, vanished lake communities. Not gradually, but rather catastrophically. Imagine that happening. You are a Neolithic farmer. You have settled by a lake. You fish there. You cultivate crops. You pray to something you don't understand. And, overnight, your world becomes Atlantis. And the worst part is that this is not myth. It is simply geology. In the 1990s, oceanographers William Ryan and Walter Pittman published seismic data and analyses of sedimentary cores that showed that the Black Sea was isolated in the past, that its sudden flooding was real, and that it may have been the origin of the myth of the universal flood. They did not start with Bible stories. They started with science, then came the stories. Because all great myths begin as a footnote to disaster. So what did the flood cover? Well, that's where it becomes uncomfortable. Sonar scanners have revealed possible artificial structures on the platform. Rectangular formations, patterns, even buried remains of what appear as roads and walls. Archaeologists are in disagreement. As always, natural formation, misinterpretation, illusions, but signs exist. And remember, the Black Sea is anoxic. If there were cities down there, towns, temples, settlements, they would still be intact, resting under sediment layers, waiting. Anoxic waters are a time capsule sealed by catastrophe, and we've barely scratched its surface. Why is that? Because diving there is difficult, expensive, dangerous, and political. Because what we could find not only challenges history, but threatens it. Textbooks say civilization began around 5000 BC. B.C. in Mesopotamia. But if we find evidence of organized life in the Black Sea from 700 or 10,000 BC, we will not only rewrite history, but erase it. And the implications of that are enormous. Because the flooding of the Black Sea was not local. It was truly global. It may have triggered migrations that founded civilizations elsewhere. Sumer, Anatolia, the Balkans, and even Egypt. Displaced people do not simply disappear. They simply move. They readily adapt. They always remember. And in their memories, they transmit stories. Stories of gods, of lost lands, of paradise undersea. Does that sound familiar? Atlantis, Eden, Lemuria. Different names, same scar. And if the Black Sea was ground zero, then this is not just sea. It is a wound, a hole in memory. And the Sphinx could be looking toward it. Because if the Black Sea flood pushed people south, towards the Levant, toward the Nile Valley, then maybe the builders of Giza came from another place. Maybe they were not Egyptians at all. Maybe they were survivors. And what about Göbekli Tepe and Kahentip, pre-ceramic hunter-gatherers who built megalithic temples in southeastern Turkey just after the flood? Coincidence or diaspora? Architecture is the key. Because trauma does not disappear, it calcifies. It becomes sacred. And what better way to encode trauma than in stone? What better place to consecrate it than a high hill away from the water? What better way to preserve your history than bury it? That is exactly what they did in Göbekli Tepe. They covered it on purpose, protecting it from the next flood. A monument not to gods, but to memory. And that takes us back to the Black Sea. Because if this flood really inspired the myths of the universal flood, if it really ended a civilization before it, then it not only killed people, it killed a world. And in its place, we built a new one. Brick by brick, board to board, mistranslation to mistranslation. And the ruins are still there. Not only in the water, but in silence. Because the Black Sea does not roar. Wait, still hypoxic blue. And below, the stories that we are not ready to hear. But maybe we are getting closer. Because a little further away, in the jungles of Central America, something round and perfect is hidden. It is not a temple or a pyramid. It is a sphere. 100 of them. Too perfect to have been carved accidentally. Too strange to ignore. The stone spheres of Costa Rica. Stone spheres of Costa Rica. Deep in the extensive green and steamy jungle of Costa Rica, the jungle does not only grow towards the guards. It swallows. And from time to time it spits out something that makes no sense. Perfect spheres. Huge, seamless, and geometrically impeccable stone balls. Hundreds of them simply thrown there. Some are the size of baseballs, others of excavators. The largest ones weigh over 15 tons. Smooth, round, silent, balanced on the jungle floor like forgotten marbles of a disappeared god. We call them the spheres, and nobody knows why they exist. Not really. Conventional archaeologists will tell you that they were made by the culture from 600 to 1500 AC, that they were status symbols, that they aligned with astronomical events, that they were placed there with wooden levers and the sweat of ancient workers. But they don't tell you how, because those people did not leave any written language, nor plans, nor detailed records of these megalithic sculptures, only fragments of ceramics, petroglyphs, ghosts on the ground. And then there is their perfection. The madness is not understood until one is seen. They are not crude attempts. They are almost spherical anomalies with tolerances within 1% of a true sphere. Many are made of granodiorite, a material not found everywhere. It had to be extracted, transported, and sculpted with tools that, we are told, did not exist in that region at that time, and then somehow polished. It's not just about craftsmanship. It is obsession. It is technology, or perhaps memory. Let's stop for a second and ask the real question. Why would a civilization without metal tools or writing dedicate such precision to a form that has no obvious function? It is not a god, nor a ruler, nor a tomb, just a sphere. Was it art? Was it a map? Was it code? Or was it a memory? Because spheres are more than geometry. They are the universal constant. The earth, the moon, the sun, the atoms, the cells, the stars, spheres are everything. And that is not a coincidence. In ancient cultures around the world, spherical shapes appear again and again. Not because they are easy to carve, because they are not, but because they meant something. Perfection, totality, the divine. And this is where things get strange. These Costa Rican spheres are not scattered randomly. Many were found aligned to the north, south, east, and west. Some in rows, others in triangles. Some form patterns eerily similar to star maps. Coincidence? Not likely, especially considering that similar stone spheres have been found in Bosnia, Mexico, New Zealand, and Scotland. The sizes vary, the materials vary, but the shape is identical. And that is terrifying because if ancient peoples separated by thousands of kilometers and oceans sculpted the same impossible form with the same obsessive detail, either they were communicating or they were remembering something they once understood. A language of forms, a geometry of memory. And in that light, the Dequis spheres become more than artifacts. They become echoes. Echoes of a pre-cataclysmic era when knowledge was codified in forms, not symbols. When the truth needed no translation, it was felt, kept, and spread through the earth like a message in stone. And what is inside? Nothing. They are solid. They have no compartments, parchments, or gold, only stone, which makes it harder to dismiss them as treasure markers or ceremonial containers. They were messages, not mailboxes. And then there is damage. When workers on a banana plantation discovered the spheres for the first time in the 1930s, many were dynamited in the hope that they contained gold. It was not like that. But the fact that people believe they could contain gold is revealing because deep down we all feel it. These things are not just rocks. They are prehistoric and perhaps intercontinental encrypted information. Because if the spheres were not invented by those who did them, and they were the ones who taught, we assume an isolated evolution. But what if knowledge, real knowledge, was at some point global, not through the internet, but through inheritance from survivors from the dispersion of people after the flood, after the sea swallowed cities, and they were forced to go inland, higher, further. They couldn't take their books, but they took their memory. And what better way to encode memory than in a form that does not decompose, does not burn, and is not forgotten? An unbreakable, immutable, uninterpretable sphere until now. Because pattern recognition is our superpower, and we are beginning to connect the dots from Costa Rica to Bosnia, from the Bimini Road to the Natlia stone circles, from the Sphinx to the underground cities of Cappadocia. It's not a trail, it's a map. And the spheres are not treasure. They are the legend, the clue that says, search more deeply, ask more. Because the Dickies did not need to write. They carved the oldest message of all. We were here. We knew it. And if the jungle is the last library, then the spheres are its index. And its silence is not empty. It is precision. Because beyond them, in a desert on the other side of the ocean, lies a constellation on the ground, An observatory made not with crystal lenses, but with standing stones and celestial alignments, older than Stonehenge, built before the pyramids, waiting in the sand. Napa, Egypt, deep in the Sahara, in a desert that doesn't want you there, is a place where the sand whispers secrets. It does not scream like the monuments of Giza. It does not rise like obelisks or shine like gold. It lies flat, ancient and impossible. Nabtapla, a dry lake bed turned archaeological enigma. Hundreds of kilometers southwest of the Nile, where the wind speaks in silence and the stars shine with indescribable clarity, this desolate basin hides something it shouldn't. An observatory, but not one with telescopes, but with stones. Stones that align with the summer solstice. Stones that follow the rising of Sirius. Stones that mark the cardinal points precisely. We still use satellites to verify it. It was not built in the Bronze Age, nor during the time of the pharaohs, but millennia before they existed, 7,000 years ago, perhaps earlier. Long before Egypt was Egypt, long before history began to scribble in hieroglyphs, someone stood in this dry basin, observing the sky, plotting the stars, and placing stones. They were not yet cultivating land. They did not write, but they measured the universe. This should not be so. The standard model of history says people did not do this then. They were primitive nomads, chasing water, not Sirius. And yet the stones still stand. And the alignments do not lie. It was not random. It was a design. Let's talk about structure. In the heart of Nabta is a circle of stones, a mini Stonehenge, which predates Stonehenge by over 1,000 years. It is about 4 meters in diameter, made up of vertical slabs and lines of stones that point to the summer solstice. There are megalithic alignments, rows of stones extending hundreds of meters like lines of vision frozen in time. Some point to where Sirius stood in the sky 6,000 years ago. Not now, but then. That is key because it means they were not only observing. They were calculating. They followed the precession, the slow astronomical drift of Earth's axis, a cycle of 26,000 years. How do you learn that? How do you detect an oscillation that takes generations to manifest itself? You can't, unless you inherit the knowledge, unless you remember, because Nabta is not a coincidence. It is not a Neolithic scientific project. It is deliberate, it is coded, and it is buried, literally. Some stones were found buried in pits, others arranged in patterns only visible from above. Subtle, hidden, silent. Why bury an observatory? To preserve it, protect it, hide it from something. Let's talk about context. When Nabta was active, the Sahara was not a desert. It was a savanna, green and full of life. The rains came, the lakes filled, the herds roamed, and people gathered here not only to survive, but also to observe. They were not only observing animals, they were observing patterns. And that tells us something terrifying. This was not the beginning. It was the reconstruction. An astronomical observatory is not built unless one tries to resynchronize, restart the clock, and relearn the sky after losing it, after something erased it all. This was not prehistory. It was the post-catastrophe. And the people of Nabta were heirs, survivors, perhaps even descendants of a civilization that remembered the stars because it had to, because everything depended on it. Agriculture, migration, ceremonies, survival. That is not learned from nothing, not in the dry bed of a lake in the middle of nowhere, unless a plan is followed. And the plan was cosmic, because this is not just astronomy. It is mythology in stone. The alignment with Sirius is not random. Sirius was sacred in Egypt. It pointed to the rise of the Nile. It was Isis, goddess of magic and rebirth. It was the eye in the sky. And that means Napa could be the origin of that mythology, not its result. The birthplace of Egyptian cosmology, of gods, cycles of time. And now we come to a difficult question. Who were they? The builders. They left no writings, no walls, just stones and silence. And that is the strongest message of them all. Because what kind of people can follow the movements of the stars over millennia and leave no monument to themselves? Answer: people who have seen things go wrong before. People who know they should not leave their names in places that can burn. People who encode knowledge, not identity, because knowledge will survive. The names do not, but the patterns do, and Nabta speaks clearly. It says we knew the sky. It says we remembered. It says we were not first. Because if these people were the beginning of Egyptian science, then the true origin of Egyptian civilization was not Nile. It was the desert, the stars, the silence, and the memory of a flood. Because here's a twist. Nabta eventually was abandoned. The climate changed. The rain stopped. The people left, but the stone remained, waiting like a seed bank, like a backup drive. And perhaps when the Nile Valley was colonized, the memory of Nabta came along. Not as architecture, as legacy, as a whispered instruction. Build with alignment, honor the sky, remember flood. Which is exactly what they did in Giza, Saqqara, Heliopolis. Each site is a clock, each monument a calendar, each temple a palace for memory. And in the background, Napa Playa is dry, silent, abandoned, but not forgotten because the stones are still there and their silence is eloquent. And while archaeologists argue whether it was a cow cult or a ceremonial site, the truth shines silently in the background. It was not religion. It was repair. They were not just worshiping stars. They were restoring a code. And that makes Nupta not relic. It is not an anomaly, but cornerstone. Because what came after not only repeated it, it amplified it in a place where the animals were carved from stone, where myth meets monument, where the first time became memory and memory became wall. The animal reliefs of Gokli. The animal reliefs of Gokli. Symbolism. There are places in the world that seem older than time itself. Gokli is one of them, but not because it's old. There are many ancient ruins. Bisip is different because it does not look like beginning of something. It looks like the end, not a beginning, a memory, a whispered praise engraved in stone, buried, hidden, deliberately forgotten. And what remains is not only architecture. They're symbols, silent, meticulous, disturbing symbols. Hundreds of animal sculptures locked in stone with a patience modern eyes have forgotten. A fox here, a vulture there, snakes, bulls, scorpions, birds, all arranged in imposing T-shaped megaliths weighing over 10 tons, raised and aligned in huge circles. It is not about prehistoric doodles. It is symbolic architecture. And in Göbekli Tepe, the symbols are not vague. They are visceral. They are not cartoon animals. They are not decorations. They're messages. Let's put ourselves in the situation. We are in southeastern Turkey, around the year 10,000 BC. That is 12,000 years ago. 7,000 years before the pyramids, before writing, before wheels, before organized religion. But apparently not before the construction of monuments, and, of course, not before iconography. So, what exactly do the animal reliefs mean? Let's begin with the obvious. They're not just a random zoo of prehistoric fauna. Each circle of megaliths has its own arrangement, its own hierarchy. Some animals are repeated. Others are specific to certain enclosures. The carvings are detailed, intentional, realistic, but stylized. They jump out of the stone like warnings or prayers. And their position is not random, either. Let's take enclosure D, the most prominent. In its center, there are two huge totems facing each other like sentinels frozen in a conversation. Each one has its arms carved on the sides, with its hands crossed on its chest, suggesting that these pillars are not just supports. They're beings, anthropomorphic presences, and around them, carved on the periphery of the circle, are dozens of animals. But these animals do not behave naturally. They do not stir like wild fauna. They seem organized. The snakes coil in tandem. The foxes stalk. The vultures spread their wings in strangely ceremonial poses. It is a choreography in stone. So what are they telling us? Here is a theory that will freeze your blood. The animal reliefs are astronomical codes. The scorpion represents the constellation Scorpio. The vulture, Sagittarius. The fox, perhaps Canis Major, a different and long-forgotten symbol. A group of researchers believes that the arrangement of the animals corresponds to the map of the stars, not the sky as it is now, but as it was then. If that is true, then these stones are not just monuments. They are calendars. Not annual calendars, nor harvest calendars, but cosmic calendars that follow a procession. Once again, just like in Nabapta, just like in Giza, just like in Stonehenge, as if they were trying to remember something or someone. And perhaps they did so because buried in these arrangements is something else, a coded date. Some scholars interpret a pattern formed by a scorpion, a vulture, and an eagle as a representation of a cosmic cataclysm. Specifically, the impact of a comet or asteroid, not a myth or metaphor, but a literal event. The younger dust impact hypothesis suggests that, around 10,800 A.C., a fragmented comet collided with Earth, causing massive floods, forest fires, and a sudden return to glacial conditions. An extinction pulse that almost ended everything we consider civilized. And if the animal reliefs of Göbekli mark that event, they are not just decoration. They are warning signs. They came from the sky. They changed everything. Let's never forget it. And yet, we have forgotten it until now. But let's delve deeper. Why animals? Why use living forms to mark celestial bodies? Because that is how oral cultures think. Numbers are not memorized without more. Stories are memorized. The constellations are not abstract geometry. They are their myth, their behavior, their narrative. The scorpion is not just a group of stars. It is the danger that arises in the night. The vulture is not just a bird. It is death reborn. The fox is not just a predator. He is cunning. Each animal is a symbol. Each symbol is a vector for memory. And here comes the blow to the stomach. These same animals appear in other ancient cultures thousands of years later on different continents, carved in caves, painted on ceramics, whispered in myths. The scorpion, the snake, the eagle are not just animals. They are archetypes. And archetypes do not evolve randomly. They are transmitted from mouth to mouth, from ruin to ruin, from survivor to survivor. And that is the real secret of the animal reliefs of Göbekli. They are not records of daily life. They are survival protocols, a memory palace for a world that was about to sink. Because here's the part that most people forget. Göbekli was not simply abandoned. It was intentionally buried. The entire site was covered with layers of sediment and debris carefully and deliberately, not by erosion or disaster, but by human hands. Why? To protect it, seal it, preserve the message for the next cycle. They were not just carving stone. They were bottling memories. They knew another catastrophe was coming. Maybe not soon, but sooner or later. And when it arrived, when the world restarted, the stone would remain. And maybe, just maybe, someone would come back, dig, read the animals, and remember. And now here we are, excavating, reading, beginning to remember. And the implications are nuclear, because if the animal reliefs are a stellar map, and the stellar map is a clock, and the clock marks a cosmic event, then Göbekli is not the beginning of civilization. It is the echo of a lost civilization. And the animals are the last guardians of that story, carved in silence, buried with fear, and now unearthed with amazement. Because they not only point backwards, but they point forward towards the next monument, towards the next survival, towards the next phase of human memory. But sometimes memory does not resurge. Sometimes it descends into the depths of the earth, where the builders not only hid from time, they hid from the sky. The ancient underground cities of Cappadocia. The ancient underground cities of Cappadocia. Turkey, for example. Derinkuyu. You don't build underground unless it's necessary. And no one builds so deep unless they're fleeing something worse than darkness. In the heart of Anatolia, in a land sculpted by volcanic ash and hardened time, under a surreal landscape of stone chimneys and hollow hills, hides a secret more intricate than any castle, more vast than most surface cities. An inverted, buried, hollow world. Welcome to Cappadocia, land of underground cities. And they are not small. The most famous, the Derinkuyu, goes more than 85 meters into the earth. 18 levels, hundreds of rooms, kitchens, churches, schools, stables, air ducts, ventilation systems so sophisticated that they still work. It could house more than 20,000 people. 20,000 underground. At a time when the dominant narrative claims that humans were barely learning to stack stones on the ground, here we have the mastery of engineering underground. Think about it. Because Kuyu is not a glorified cave. It is not a hiding place or a natural formation. It is planned architecture. A vertical city excavated, not built. Hand excavated through soft volcanic rock, but with a level of design that denotes long-term habitability, not an emergency shelter. Each floor is thought out. Each tunnel is a narrow corridor calculated to control movement. Huge stone doors with rotating discs weighing up to half a ton seal the corridors from inside. Security measures, booby traps, strategic bottlenecks. This was not done by people who feared bandits. It was done by people who feared extinction. But from what? Let's address the basic question. Why would anyone build a city underground? A temporary hiding place? That's what a tent is for. Defense? That's what the wall is for. This is something else. This is paranoia in stone. It is an infrastructure designed to disappear. And it's not just one audacity. At least 200 underground cities are known in the region. Many of them are interconnected. Some stretch for kilometers. Some reach depths defying practicality. And the deeper one goes, the more ancient they seem. There's a theory among local scholars and independent researchers that these cities were not only used during times of war. They were built even before nations existed to war with. Built in an era in which the threat did not come from armies, but from the sky, from above, from whatever shattered the surface of the world. Perhaps a comet. Perhaps solar flares. Perhaps something even more ancient. Because here's the twist. The oldest levels of Deranu are deepest. The more one descends, the more precise the carvings are, and the more intact the characteristics are. Later occupants added rooms on upper levels. They dug shortcuts, modified them. But the original builders went into the depths as if hiding from something that burned or poisoned the surface or made the air unbreathable. It was not just about security. It was about survival in the long term of complete environmental isolation. And that should terrify you, because we are not talking about air raid shelters for 3 days. We are talking about self-sufficient habitability systems for thousands, with planned agriculture, water wells dug hundreds of meters deep, food storage chambers with indications of long-term conservation. This is pre-modern modernity. And we're supposed to believe that no one on the surface even realized that this civilization, this community of architects, engineers, masons, and planners existed in a vacuum. No, they did not build in isolation. They built with desperation because something came before them, something that collapsed. And in that collapse, they inherited knowledge. Not books or plans, but memories. And they did what human beings always do when facing the apocalypse. They adapted. But here's where things worsen. Some ventilation ducts, narrow tubes running through hundreds of meters of rock, no longer connect to the surface. They are sealed. Why? Perhaps due to natural collapse. But what if they seal them on purpose? What if what was coming was not just fire, but something more? Something that it is not enough to hide from, something that must be blocked. And then there is distribution. It is not oriented only toward survival. It is symbolic. Many chambers mimic surface structures, places of worship, council chambers, community halls. It is as if the builders were not only fleeing the apocalypse. They were rebuilding society from memory. What is above is like what is below. That phrase resonates in ancient esoteric traditions. It is a fundamental principle of Hermeticism. But perhaps it is older than we think. Perhaps it began here. Because what if Cappadocia was not just a refuge? What if it were a model, a place to remember how civilization works when the surface world forgets? And here comes the final blow. Nobody knows who exactly built it. Local legends tell of the peoples who lived there before. Beings with knowledge of the stars, the stone, how to hide and survive. The Hittites, too late. The Phrygians, the same problem. The Persians, Byzantines, all used these cities. But they did not build them. They settled as illegal occupants in the ruins of a past too old to understand. And each culture that came after left its graffiti on the walls. But the original architects disappeared, erased, as if they had never existed or as if they had never been destined to be found. And here is where the pattern starts to hurt. Because everywhere we look in this series of pre-flood impossibilities, we find similar themes. Inexplicable megaliths, alignments to celestial events, stones carved with precision impossible for the tools of that time, evidence of sudden cataclysm followed by silence, and then memory encoded in geometry, preserved in carvings buried under the world like a heartbeat we forgot to listen to. Cappadocia is not an isolated case. It is a chapter in a written book, written on the planet's face, a book that we are barely beginning to reread. And if Derinquiu were a library, the tunnels would still resonate. Not with voices, but warnings. Because those who built them were not only fleeing destruction, they ran through it. And what they left is not only impressive. It is a message. Build in depth. Build strongly. And do not forget it, which takes us back to the starting point, back to the surface, back to the light, back to the place where history supposedly began, to a structure so absurd, so immense, so misaligned with our idea of ancient engineering that its mere existence demands a different type of question. Not how it was built, but when and by whom. Without beating about the bush,